You are listening to a story exclusively narrated on the Dark Romance Stories channel. Relax and step into the world of love stories filled with mystery, emotions, and passion. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment to support us. This content is the property of Dark Romance Stories. Please do not copy or re-upload it in any form. Rain came to New Orleans the way grief came to Salvatore Mancini. Slowly, then all at once, soaking everything before you understood it had started. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse above the warehouse district, watching the storm chew at the river. 41 floors below, the Mississippi turned the color of gunmetal, and the cargo lights of his port blinked through the downpour like a constellation he owned. Every crane, every container, every dock worker who clocked in before dawn and pretended not to know who signed the checks behind the checks. All his. Sal wore a charcoal suit that cost more than most of those men made in a season, and he wore it the way a soldier wears a uniform, without vanity, only obligation. His face had the kind of severe handsomeness that made people lower their voices. Dark hair threaded with early silver at the temples, a jaw cut from the same Sicilian stone as the cliffs above Cefalù. Eyes the flat green-grey of olive leaves in winter. Beautiful, people said, and then, after they'd met him, cold. Behind him the apartment was silent, except for the small sounds of a child trying to be quiet. "Papa," Gia's voice, careful, "is it a hurricane?" He turned. His daughter sat on the white sofa with her knees pulled to her chest, a stuffed rabbit named Cornelio crushed under her chin. 7 years old, with her mother's wild dark curls and her mother's serious mouth and a paleness to her lips lately that no one in this house would say out loud. "No, tesoro," he said, crossing the room. He sat beside her, and she folded herself into his side without hesitation, the way no adult on earth would dare. "Just rain. Rain can't hurt us up here." "How high are we?" "High enough that the rain has to climb to reach us, and it gets tired." He pressed his lips to her curls. She smelled of the lavender soap the housekeeper used, and underneath it, faintly, of medicine. She'd been tired lately, tired climbing stairs, tired after swimming, which she loved, in the rooftop pool that he'd had heated to exactly the temperature she liked. Last week she'd gone blue at the lips in the shallow end, and he'd carried her out so fast he'd nearly broken his own arm against the tile. And the private physician, a soft-handed man who took Mancini money and asked Mancini-approved questions, had listened to her chest with a stethoscope and gone very still. "A murmur," the man had said. "More than a murmur. She needs imaging. She needs a specialist." Sal Mancini was a man who solved problems. He had buried problems in the river. He had paid problems to leave the country, had broken the hands of problems, had once, in a back room off Decatur Street that he never let himself remember, ended a problem with his own 2 hands while it begged. But this thing inside his daughter's chest, this flaw braided into her since before her first breath, this he could not threaten, could not buy, could not drown. "Marco's here," Gia said, lifting her head at the soft chime of the private elevator. Marco Greco stepped into the penthouse, shaking rain off a black umbrella, his bulk filling the doorway. Sal's right hand for 15 years, since they were both young and stupid in Palermo. Marco had a face like a closed door, and a heart that opened for exactly 2 people, Sal and the child now waving at him from the couch. Principessa, Marco said, bowing with absurd formality. Gia giggled. It was the best sound in the apartment. Go wash for dinner, little one, Sal said. I need to talk to Marco about boring things. She went, dragging Cornelio by one ear, and the moment the bathroom door closed, Sal's face changed. The warmth drained out of it like water through sand. What was left was the man the city feared. Tell me you have it, Sal said. Marco set a manila folder on the marble island. Cardiology, pediatric, the imaging from the clinic. I had a man at the hospital pull the reed. Sal opened the folder. He was not a doctor. The grey-scale images meant nothing to him. Butterflies of shadow in his daughter's chest. But the summary at the top, typed in clinical black, meant everything. Tetralogy of Fallot, with pulmonary atresia. Variant anatomy. Surgical correction required. High complexity. The words swam. He set both palms flat on the cold marble and breathed the way the prison shrink had once taught him. In for 4, hold for 4. The only thing that man had ever given him worth keeping. How bad? Sal said. Without surgery? Marco's voice was careful. The clinic doctor wouldn't put a number in writing, but he said the kind of surgery she needs, there aren't many hands in the country good enough. Maybe a dozen. Maybe fewer for her exact, he gestured at the films, her exact problem. Then we fly her to the best one, Boston, Houston, wherever. That's the thing, boss. Marco pulled a single printed page from inside his jacket. The best one for this is here, in the city. Tulane and the Children's Hospital both fight to keep her. 3 of the dozen names in the country, and the one with the best record for this exact defect, the variant, the rare presentation, she's 6 miles from where we're standing. Sal took the page. A photograph, official, a hospital badge headshot. A woman, mid-30s, brown skin warm as cypress honey. A halo of dark curls she'd made no effort to tame for the camera, and eyes that looked straight back at the lens with an unhurried, assessing intelligence that made Sal feel, absurdly, like he'd been caught doing something. Dr. Iris Delacroix, M.D. Pediatric cardiothoracic surgery. Delacroix, Sal said slowly. The name tugged something. Creole family, old, Tremé or thereabouts. You know them. I know of them. He looked at the photo a long moment. Get me a meeting. Marco shifted his weight. He did that only when he was about to say something Sal wouldn't like. I already made some calls, quietly. And she won't take a meeting brokered through anyone, not through the foundation, not through a donation. Her office said, Marco actually winced. Her office said Dr. Delacroix doesn't accept patients whose families try to arrange access. She has a wait list. She takes them in order of medical need, and she said, and I'm quoting the receptionist, that nobody buys a place in line in her OR. For the first time in a very long time, something moved across Salvatore Mancini's cold face that was almost a smile. Not warmth, recognition. The respect a hard man feels for a wall that does not move when he leans on it. She knows who I am, Sal said. It wasn't a question. Everybody in this city knows who you are, boss. The question is whether she cares. The bathroom door opened. Gia came out with damp hands and the front of her shirt wet where she'd leaned against the sink, and she looked at the two men with the unnerving radar children have for adults discussing them. "Are you talking about my heart?" she asked. The room went very still. Marco found something fascinating to study on the ceiling. Sal crossed to her and knelt, so that for once he was looking up at his daughter instead of down. He took her small wet hands in his enormous ones. "Yes," he said. He had decided long ago never to lie to her the way the world had lied to him. "Your heart needs a little fixing, the way a clock sometimes needs a clever person to open it up and set the gears right." "Will it hurt?" "I won't let it hurt more than a minute longer than it has to." His voice did not shake. He had trained it for years not to shake. "I'm going to find the cleverest person in the whole city, and I'm going to ask her." The word ask felt strange in his mouth, foreign, a coin from a country he'd left. "I'm going to ask her to help us." "Ask nicely," Gia advised. "Yes," Sal said, and something in his chest, near the broken part he never examined, turned over. "I'll ask nicely." That night, after she slept, he stood again at the window, with the rain still falling, and the photograph of Iris Delacroix in his hand. He had spent 20 years learning that the world responded to two things, money and fear. He commanded oceans of both, and the one door he needed to walk through was held shut by a woman who, by all accounts, despised exactly those two things. He looked at her steady eyes in the badge photo for a long time. Tomorrow, he thought, he would do something he had not done since he was a boy kneeling in a Palermo church with his mother's hand on his neck. Tomorrow, he would beg. Iris Delacroix had been awake for 26 hours, and the city she loved was trying to kill her patients faster than she could save them. She walked out of the children's hospital at 6 a.m. into the wet grey hush after the storm. Scrubs still on under her jacket, the smell of antiseptic baked so deep into her skin she'd stopped noticing it years ago. A 4-month-old, with a transposition of the great arteries, had crashed at 3 a.m, and she'd had her hands inside his chest by 3:40, and he was alive now, pink and furious in the NICU, and that was the whole reason a person did this. You traded your sleep, your marriage, your knees, your back, for the right to walk out into a grey dawn, knowing a baby would see his first birthday because of what your hands had done. It was the only kind of power Iris had ever wanted, and she'd paid for every ounce. She drove home to the shotgun house in Tremé that had belonged to her grandmother and her grandmother's grandmother. A narrow jewel box of a place, painted the deep ochre of a Sazerac, with ferns drowning the front gallery and a tin roof that sang in the rain. She'd grown up 3 blocks from here. She buried her mother from the church on the corner. She knew this neighborhood and this city the way she knew the chambers of a child's heart. Every valve, every vessel, every place where the blood ran wrong. Which was how she knew, when she finally collapsed onto her own couch with a cup of chicory coffee, exactly who the man on her voicemail was. Dr. Delacroix. A voice like dark water moving under ice. Refined, controlled. The faintest Sicilian shadow under the careful American vowels. "My name is Salvatore Mancini. I believe your office has declined a meeting on my behalf. And I want you to know I respect that. I'm not calling to change your mind about your wait list or your principles. I'm calling because the patient is my daughter. She is 7 years old, and I am told you may be the only person in this city who can keep her alive. I am asking you to see her, not as a Mancini, as a child. I'll be at the river end of Crescent Park at 9. I'll wait however long it takes. The message ended. Iris sat very still in her grandmother's house with the ferns dripping and the coffee going cold in her hands. She knew the name Mancini the way every native of this city knew it, the way you knew which stretches of which streets to avoid after dark, which bars had a second business in the back, which charity galas were really money being scrubbed clean under chandeliers. The Mancini Foundation had a wing at the art museum. The Mancini name was on a literacy program and a hurricane relief fund and a scholarship she suspected half her own cousins had benefited from without knowing whose blood the money was washed in. She also knew, because in this city the knowing travelled by a different current than the news, that the port ran on Mancini's tolerance, that men disappeared off the docks, that a councilman who'd crossed the family 2 years back had been found in his car in the industrial canal, with the doors locked from the outside. A monster, then. A monster in a good suit who funded the literacy of children whose fathers he probably had killed. And he had a daughter with a broken heart. Iris pressed the heels of her hands into her eyes. The oath she'd taken did not have a clause about the sins of the father. The 4-month-old she'd saved at 3 a.m. had a father in lockup at Orleans Parish for armed robbery, and she had not paused for 1/2 second over the boy's chest to consider it. A child's heart did not know what its parents had done. A child's heart only knew how to beat or how to fail. She thought about deleting the message and never going. Then she thought about a 7-year-old going blue at the lips, and she got up and she showered the hospital off her skin, and she drove down to the river. He was exactly where he said he'd be, and he had waited, just as he'd said he would. Crescent Park ran along the river below the Marigny, a ribbon of rusted steel walkway and wildflowers gone feral, the great arc of the steel bridge rising over the water. At 9 in the morning after a storm, it was nearly empty. A jogger, a man with a dog, and one man standing alone at the rail at the river's edge, his back to her, watching the water the way she imagined a captain watched a sea he didn't trust. She knew him before he turned. There was a stillness to him, a contained density, like the air right before lightning. Dr. Delacroix. He turned, and the photograph in his file had not prepared her. In person he was taller, harder, the cold beauty of him almost unfair, and the green-grey eyes fixed on her with an intensity that should have frightened her, and instead made her lift her chin. Mr. Mancini. She did not offer her hand. I came because you said the word daughter and the word 7. I want to be clear that's the only reason. I don't take meetings, I don't take favours, and I am not for sale. Not my hands, not my schedule, not my silence. Something flickered in his face. Not anger. She'd expected anger. It was closer to relief. Good, he said. I didn't come to buy you. I came because everyone I have ever needed in my life I've been able to command, and I can't command this. I can't command her heart to be whole. His voice did not break, but it pressed against something. So I'm asking. I don't know how to do it well. I'm out of practice, but I'm asking you to look at my daughter and tell me if you can save her. Iris studied him. She had a gift, honed over 1,000 terrified parents for reading the truth under the performance. Mothers who pretended to be calm, fathers who pretended to understand. And this man, this dangerous, refined, terrible man, was not pretending. The fear in him was real and raw and barely leashed, and it was the only thing in the city that morning that was entirely, nakedly true. "Send me her films," Iris said. "All of them. The clinic read, the imaging, everything, through the hospital portal, not through some man in a coat. I'll review them today. If she's a surgical candidate, and I'm the right surgeon, she goes on my list by medical need, same as every other child. No special treatment, no private wing. She comes to the children's hospital and she waits her turn, unless her turn is now, in which case it's now because of her heart and nothing else. Are we clear?" "Crystal," Sal said. "And Mr. Mancini." She held his gaze, and she let him see that she knew. All of it. The river, the canal, the locked car doors. "I know who you are. I know what you are. I'm doing this for her, not for you. You will never confuse the two." For a long moment he said nothing, and the river moved behind him, and the bridge rose over them both. "No," he said finally, very quietly. "I don't imagine I'll ever confuse anything about you, Dr. Delacroix." She turned and walked back up the rusted ramp toward her car, and she did not let herself look back, and she felt his eyes on her the entire way, like a hand laid flat between her shoulder blades. The films were worse than she'd hoped, and better than she'd feared. Iris sat in the dim of her home office at midnight, the only light the cold glow of the monitor, and rotated the three-dimensional reconstruction of Gia Mancini's heart in space with 2 fingers on the trackpad. She had seen perhaps 4 hearts like it in her career. The pulmonary valve all but absent, the great vessels in conversation with the wrong chambers, a network of collateral arteries the little body had grown on its own, desperate, improvised plumbing, the heart's own stubborn refusal to quit. It was, she thought, a heart that had been fighting alone for 7 years and was finally, quietly losing. It could be fixed. She could fix it. Maybe. The kind of maybe that lived in the top 0.1% of difficulty, the kind that would take 8 hours and every cell of skill she'd spent 2 decades building. The kind where a child went on bypass and you held her life in a machine and your own 2 hands, and you did not get to be tired or afraid or distracted by the fact that her father controlled the port and possibly the morgue. She made herself coffee at 1 a.m. and looked at the heart some more. Her phone buzzed. A number she didn't have saved, but she knew it. "This is Sal. I won't text you about her heart, that's your domain, and I won't crowd it. I'm only writing to say she asked tonight if the clever lady was going to help her. I told her I didn't know yet. She said to tell you Cornelio, her rabbit, is also nervous and would feel better if you said hello to him. I'm aware this is not how doctors are contacted. I'm telling you anyway because it's true." Iris read it 3 times. She should not have smiled. She was alone in her grandmother's house at 1 in the morning, looking at a monster's text about a stuffed rabbit. And she should not have smiled, and she did. "Tell Cornelio," she typed, "that I review every case very carefully and that I have a perfect record with rabbits." The reply came fast. "She's asleep, but I'll tell her at breakfast. Thank you for answering. You didn't have to." "I'm not answering you," Iris wrote. "I'm answering a rabbit." A pause, then, "Understood. Good night, Dr. Delacroix. She set the phone face down, as if that would help, and went back to the heart. She accepted the case formally the next morning, through the proper channels, with the proper paperwork, and she put Gia Mancini on her surgical calendar 11 days out, the soonest the OR, the perfusion team, and her own preoperative protocol would allow, and not 1 hour sooner for any name on earth. She met the patient 3 days later in clinic. She had braced herself for the father. She had not braced herself for the child. Gia Mancini came into the exam room holding a stuffed rabbit by one ear and wearing a yellow dress and rain boots, even though it wasn't raining, and she looked up at Iris with enormous dark eyes and said, with the gravity of a small judge, "Are you the clever lady?" "I'm Dr. Iris," Iris said, crouching to her level. "And I have it on good authority I'm clever, yes. Is this Cornelio?" The child's whole face changed. "You know his name." "We've corresponded," Iris said solemnly, and shook the rabbit's paw. And behind the child she felt Sal Mancini go still in the doorway, watching her with an expression she could not afford to look at directly. The exam was gentle and thorough. Iris talked Gia through every step, the cold stethoscope she warmed first against her own palm, the pulse ox clip she called a glowing finger hat, the ultrasound goop she let Gia squirt onto her own chest. And the whole time she listened and watched, and her trained eye read the story the body told. The slight clubbing of the small fingers, the blue tinge at the nail beds, the way the child's breath caught when she'd climbed onto the table. And then, helping Gia out of the gown and back into the yellow dress, Iris saw something that stopped her hands. A scar. Old, silvered, the size of a quarter, low on the child's back near the kidney. And another, finer, along the ribs, the kind of marks that had nothing to do with a heart. Iris did not change her face. 20 years of clinic had taught her never to change her face, but she filed it away in the cold, clean part of her mind where she kept the things that didn't add up, and she finished dressing the child, and she stood. "She's a wonderful patient," Iris said to Sal. "Brave, funny. I'm going to take very good care of her." "I know you will," Sal said. He was looking at her too closely. He'd seen her hands stop. Of course he had. He was a man who survived by noticing exactly that kind of thing. "Gia," Iris said, "would you sit with the nice nurse for 2 minutes and pick a sticker? I need to talk to your papa about boring grown-up clock-fixing things." When the child was gone, the temperature of the room changed. "You saw something," Sal said. "I saw a scar that isn't from any surgery in her chart," Iris said quietly. "2 scars. Old, healed. I'm not going to pretend I didn't." For one moment, just one, something terrible moved behind his eyes, grief and rage and shame braided so tight she couldn't tell where one ended. And then the cold facade came down like a steel door. "Children fall," he said. "They do," Iris agreed, "and I'm going to assume that's all it was. For now. Because right now, my only job is her heart, and I will not let anything, not a scar, not a question, not who you are, distract me from doing that job perfectly." She gathered her files against her chest like armor. "But understand me, Mr. Mancini. After her heart is fixed, if I have any reason to believe a child in my care has been hurt by anyone, there is no name in this city, including yours, that will stop me from saying so." She walked past him to the door. "Dr. Delacroix." His voice stopped her. She didn't turn. "She didn't fall," he said, so low she almost didn't catch it. "And it wasn't me. I would put a gun in my own mouth before I let anyone." He stopped, recovered. "When this is over, when she's safe, I'll tell you, the whole thing. Not because I have to, because you saw, and you didn't look away. And in 20 years, no one has done that." Iris stood with her hand on the cold door handle, and against every instinct she had spent a lifetime building, she believed him. 11 days, she said, and left. The Mancini Foundation's spring benefit was the kind of event that made the society pages and laundered a fortune in the same evening. It was held at the family's antebellum mansion on CD Street. Charles, a white-columned monument set back behind 100-year-old oaks dripping with Spanish moss, and, tonight, with fairy lights. Bentley after Bentley crept up the gravel drive. Inside, beneath chandeliers like frozen fireworks, the city's wealth and the city's beauty drank champagne off silver trays, carried by men who, Iris suspected, were carrying more than champagne under their jackets. She had not wanted to come. The invitation had arrived not from Sal, he'd kept his word, never once trying to buy her with access or favour, but from the Children's Hospital itself, because the Mancini Foundation was the gala's reason for existing, and a third of the paediatric cardiology wing's funding flowed from this single night, and the head of her department had all but ordered her to attend. "Smile. Be seen. The man's about to give us $4 million. So Iris stood in a borrowed midnight blue gown that she'd let her cousin talk her into, with her curls pinned up and her grandmother's pearls at her throat, holding a glass of champagne she had no intention of drinking, feeling like a surgeon impersonating a guest. She saw him before he saw her. Sal Mancini moved through his own party like a shark through a reef. Everyone aware of him, everyone making space, his refined smile fixed in place as he shook hands and accepted thanks and played the philanthropist to the hilt. In a black tuxedo he was devastating, and Iris hated that her clinical eye noted it the same way it noted a cyanotic lip, an observation she could not unmake. And then he turned, mid-handshake, and found her across the ballroom, and the performance slipped. For one unguarded second, the smile dropped, and something else surfaced, something that looked at her like she was the only real thing in a room full of beautiful counterfeits. And then it was gone, smoothed over, and he was excusing himself from the senator he'd been charming, and crossing the floor toward her with the unhurried certainty of a man who had never once in his life had to wonder if he was welcome. "Dr. Delacroix." He inclined his head. Up close, he smelled of cedar and something darker. "I didn't think you'd come. I didn't think I would either. I was ordered. You're about to fund my department for a year." "Money's easy," he said. "It's the only easy thing I have." A woman in red appeared at his elbow before Iris could answer. Stunning, sharp, a Mancini cousin by the look of her, with a smile aimed at Iris like a blade. "Salvatore, you're hiding the doctor all to yourself. The famous Dr. Delacroix. We've heard so much." Her eyes travelled down Iris's borrowed gown and back up, pricing it. "It's so generous of you to take on Gia's little problem." "It's not a little problem," Iris said pleasantly, "and I don't take on patients out of generosity. I take them on because I'm the best, and they need the best. Excuse me." She moved to step away. and Sal moved with her, a hand hovering at the small of her back without touching, a courtier's distance, a bodyguard's vigilance, and steered her smoothly toward the relative quiet of the garden doors, away from the woman in red, away from the crowd. "That was Donatella," he said, "my cousin. She means about half of what she says, and all of it is poison. I gathered." Iris stepped out onto the back gallery. The garden fell away below, lit blue, a fountain murmuring. The noise of the party dimmed. "Your family doesn't like that you've let an outsider near the princess." "My family," Sal said, and the way he said the word was its own dark country. "Doesn't like a great many things I do, including the foundation, the literacy program, the hospital." He set his glass down on the stone balustrade. "There's a faction that thinks I've gone soft, that a man in my position shouldn't build libraries, should only build—" He paused. "The other thing. And what do you think?" He looked out over the blue garden for a long moment. The fairy lights caught the silver at his temples. "I think," he said, "that I have built a great deal of the other thing. And I'm trying to build something else before my daughter is old enough to understand what her name is." Iris said nothing. The honesty of it sat between them, dangerous as a live wire. "You don't drink your champagne," he observed. "I'm operating on a 7-year-old in 8 days. I don't drink, period, when I'm carrying a case. My hands belong to her until she's off bypass." Something crossed his face. She would later understand it was the precise moment, the exact instant that Salvatore Mancini fell. Not at her beauty. He was surrounded by beauty he could buy. It was the way she said, "My hands belong to her," the way she carried a stranger's child inside her like a vow, the way she had walked into the most dangerous house in the city and refused a glass of wine because of a heart she hadn't fixed yet. "You're a remarkable woman, Dr. Delacroix," he said, very quietly, and there was nothing smooth in it, nothing performed. "I'm a tired woman who'd like to make her appearance, eat one crab cake and go home to sleep," Iris said, because the alternative was to feel the warmth spreading under her ribs, and she could not afford that. "Where I will dream exclusively about your daughter's pulmonary outflow tract. Good night, Mr. Mancini." She made it 3 steps before he spoke again. "Iris." Her name in his mouth stopped her cold. He had never used it. The intimacy of it landed like a hand. "Thank you," he said, "for seeing her as a child, when the rest of this room sees only my name, including me some days." He picked his glass back up, the armor sliding into place. "I won't keep you from your crab cake." She walked back into the gala and ate exactly 1 crab cake and shook exactly the right number of hands, and the entire time she felt the warm weight of his attention from across the room, like the sun on the back of her neck on a winter day, something she should move away from, something her whole body wanted to turn toward. Across the garden, unseen, an older man watched them both from a shadowed window of the upper floor. He was perhaps 70, silver-haired, elegant, with the same green-grey eyes as Sal and none of his nephew's reluctance. He swirled a glass of red wine and watched the doctor and his nephew, and he watched the way the boy's eyes followed her, and he smiled the way a man smiles when he has found, at long last, the lever that will move the immovable thing. Uncle Tommaso Mancini had been waiting a long time to control his nephew. Now he knew exactly how. The 8 days before the surgery were the longest of Sal Mancini's life, and the strangest, because they were also, God forgive him, among the happiest. Iris had insisted Gia come in for pre-operative visits, and Sal had insisted on bringing her himself, and so the surgeon, who would not be bought, found the mob boss in her clinic 3 times that week, sitting too large in the small plastic chair, watching his daughter chatter at her with a tenderness that did not fit anything Iris knew about men like him. She has to be calm going in, Iris had explained the first day. Stress raises her cardiac demand. So between now and the OR, the most important medicine I can prescribe is that she be happy and unafraid. You can do that better than any drug I have. So he did. He took Gia to the aquarium and let her name every fish. He bought Cornelio a tiny matching hospital gown so the rabbit could have his clock fixed too. He sat on the floor of the penthouse. Marco reported this to Iris's voicemail, unprompted, baffled, and a little moved, and let his daughter paint his fingernails the blue of her favourite ocean. And he texted Iris, never about money, never about the case in any way that crowded her. Small things. She asked if you have a Cornelia. I said I'd inquire. And today she informed me that hearts are shaped like hearts. I did not correct her. Was that wrong? And once, late, I can't sleep. I keep thinking about the machine that breathes for her during the surgery. Tell me it's good. I don't need it to be safe. Nothing is safe. Tell me it's the best. And Iris, who should have kept every wall up, found herself answering, it's the best. The perfusionist running it has done 4,000 cases. I'd put my own child on that machine. Do you have a child? No. A pause. I have 400. I keep all their drawings. Then you understand. Yes, she'd written, and turned off the phone and lain awake a long time herself. On the 6th day, the warmth turned briefly to ice. Iris was leaving the hospital after a double shift when she found a man leaning against her car. Not one of Sal's. She'd learned to recognize the quiet competence of Sal's men, the way they made themselves furniture. This one wanted to be seen. Heavy-set, gold at his throat, a smile with too many teeth. Doctor. Delacroix. Not a question. You're a hard lady to get a minute with. Whoever you are, you're standing on my parking spot. Name's Renzo. I work for some people who have an interest in Salvatore Mancini. He didn't move. Specifically, in his soft spots, and it seems lately he's grown a new one. Brown skin, good hands, doesn't take a bribe. Funny, we offered you a place in line through 3 different fronts, and you turned them all down. Mancini just asks, and you say yes. The smile widened. What's that about, Doctor? Iris's pulse was steady. She had stood in operating rooms while children died on her table. She did not frighten the way men like this expected women to frighten. It's about a 7-year-old's pulmonary atresia, she said, which I doubt you can spell. Now get off my car before I call the only number in this city that scares you more than I do. For a flicker, something in his face acknowledged the hit. Then he pushed off the car, slow, deliberate. Just remember, Doctor, the people I work for don't care about the kid's heart. They care about her father's. And from where I'm standing, you've gotten awful close to it. He tipped an imaginary hat. Be careful whose weakness you become. He walked into the dark of the parking garage and was gone. Iris drove home with her hands a little tighter on the wheel than usual, and she did not text Sal about it, because she told herself it was nothing, and because some smaller, more honest part of her did not want him to do whatever a man like Sal would do to a man like Renzo on her behalf. She slept badly. She dreamed of the heart, the blue improvised heart, and of a man's hand that did not quite touch her back. On the seventh day, Sal found out anyway. She walked into the pre-op consult, and he was already standing. And the moment she shut the door, he said, low and lethal, "A man named Renzo spoke to you in the parking garage at University Medical Center 2 nights ago at 11:40 p.m. Iris stopped. How? I have cameras on every place you park, every route you take between your house and any hospital you operate in, and 2 men on you at all times that you've never noticed because they're good at their jobs." He said it flatly, as a fact, not a confession. "I've had them since the day you accepted her case." The violation of it should have enraged her. The protectiveness of it should have terrified her. Instead, she felt horribly safe, and she was furious at herself for it. "You've been following me." "I've been keeping you alive," Sal said, and the cold cracked, and underneath it was something raw and possessive and barely contained. "Renzo works for the Vandals, a crew that's been clawing at my hold on the eastern docks for a year. They've realized that hurting you would hurt me more than hurting me would, which means as of 2 nights ago, you are the most dangerous thing in my life, a person I cannot afford to lose." He stepped closer, not touching, never touching, but the air between them was charged enough to ignite. "I will not apologize for the cameras. I'll take them down the day you tell me you'd rather be in danger than be watched. But you'll have to actually say it because I won't guess." Iris's heart, her own traitorous, ordinarily reliable heart, was doing something arrhythmic. "You don't get to decide that for me," she said. "No," he agreed. "You're the only person alive I don't get to decide things for. That's most of why I—" He stopped himself, visibly, pulled back from the edge of a word. "Why you what?" "Why I trust you with her," he said, which was not, they both knew, the end of the sentence he'd started. The door opened. Gia bounced in with Cornelio in his tiny gown. "Dr. Iris, Cornelio practiced being brave." And just like that, the lethal thing in the room folded itself away, and Sal Mancini knelt down to be at his daughter's level, and Iris watched the deadliest man in New Orleans admire a stuffed rabbit's courage, and she understood, with a clarity that frightened her more than Renzo ever had, that she was in serious, serious trouble. The surgery was scheduled for 6 a.m. Iris always operated early, when her hands were freshest and the OR was coldest and quietest. The night before, she did what she always did before a hard case. She went home. She ran through the operation in her mind, step by step, like a pianist fingering a concerto on a tabletop. She ate something simple and she slept, or tried to. She just turned off the kitchen light at 10 p.m. when she heard the car in the street outside her grandmother's house. Not unusual in Tremé. But then she heard it idle. Then she heard a door. Then her own front door, which she had triple-locked out of habits learned long before any Mancini entered her life, splintered inward, off its hinges. She had time to grab the cast-iron skillet off the stove and swing it once. She connected. She heard a man swear. She felt the satisfying jolt up her arm. And then there were two more of them, and a wet cloth was clamped over her mouth and nose, and the last thing she thought, with the strange precision of a surgeon's mind, was, "Chloroform is amateur. They're rushing. Someone wanted this fast." And then the ochre walls of her grandmother's house tilted and went black. Sal Mancini was reading Gia a story at the same moment in the penthouse, the city glittering below, his daughter clean and calm and brave for the morning, when Marco came in without knocking, and the look on Marco's face was a look Sal had seen exactly twice in 15 years, and both times someone had died. "Outside," Sal said to Marco, and kissed his daughter's forehead and walked out into the hall and shut the door, and only then said, "Tell me." "They took her." Marco's voice was iron over fear. "Delacroix, 20 minutes ago. 3 men, a van, in and out of her house in Tremay in under 4 minutes. Our man on her was—" Marco's jaw worked. "They got Paulie. He's at Toro, he'll live, but they got him first, that's how they got in clean." The world went very white and very silent. Sal Mancini had felt rage before. He had felt the red, drowning fury that had ended men. But this was not that. This was colder than that, and older, and it came up from a place inside him he had sealed shut after his wife, a place he had sworn never to feel again because feeling it had cost him everything. "Who?" he said. Just the word. Marco's phone buzzed. He looked at it. His face changed. Video. Encrypted drop. From... He turned the screen. It was Iris. Conscious now, slumped in a wooden chair in a bare concrete room, a warehouse by the look of it, by the smell of it through the speaker, the river rot and diesel that meant the Eastern Docks. There was a bruise blooming on her cheekbone, and her wrists were zip-tied, and her chin was up. Even now, even there, her chin was up. A voice off camera, smooth, almost bored. "Mr. Mancini, by now you've noticed your doctor is no longer in her kitchen. Here's how tonight works. You signed an agreement last spring giving you exclusive rights to the Eastern Container Terminal. By midnight, you will sign that over to us. Our lawyer will bring the papers to your door. You sign, and your doctor walks into her OR at 6 a.m. with all 10 fingers and a face she can still look at in the mirror. You don't sign." The camera moved. A man stepped into frame behind Iris and set, very gently, on the table beside her, a pair of bone shears. Surgical. The exact instrument she used to open a child's chest. "And at 5 a.m. we start with the hands. A surgeon's worth her hands, isn't she? Pity about the little girl. But that's on you, isn't it, Salvatore?" Midnight. The video ended. For 10 full seconds, Sal Mancini did not move and did not breathe. Then he looked up, and Marco, who had known him for half his life, took an involuntary step back, because the man looking out of Sal's eyes was the one they kept buried, the one from the back room off Decatur Street, the one Sal had spent 10 years and $4 million in foundation money trying to bury under libraries. "Get the car," Sal said very quietly. "Get Marco's team, all of them. Wake them. Boss, the terminal, if we just sign, we're not signing." Sal was already moving, already shrugging out of the cardigan he'd worn to read his daughter a bedtime story, already opening the safe behind the false panel where the bedtime father kept the other man's tools. "Sign the terminal over tonight, and they know it works. They take her tomorrow and the next one after, and they own me for the rest of my life. And his hands were steady on the matte black weight of the pistol, steadier than they'd been in years. And they have laid their hands on her. They put shears on the table next to her hands. He turned, and the look on his face was something beyond rage, something that had passed through rage and out the other side into a terrible, surgical calm. "Stay with Gia," he told Marco. "You don't leave that door. If I'm not back by 5, you take her and you run, and you don't stop running. Promise me." "Boss, you can't go yourself. That's exactly what they want me to choose between her hands and my pride." Sal slid the pistol into the holster at his back and pulled his jacket over it. And for one instant, the philanthropist and the killer were the same man, fused, complete. "They've made a mistake. They think I'm choosing between 2 things I own." He paused at the door. "She isn't a thing I own. She's the first thing in 10 years I've wanted to deserve. Watch my daughter, Marco." And Salvatore Mancini walked out of the penthouse, into the elevator, and down 41 floors toward the river and the warehouse, and the men who had put shears on a table beside Iris Delacroix's hands. And somewhere below the city, the storm was starting again, and this time it had teeth. The eastern docks at midnight were a black country of stacked containers and crane shadows, the river hissing against the pilings, the rain coming sideways now off the Gulf. Iris had spent the captive hours doing the only thing she knew how to do under pressure: assessing, planning, refusing to panic. She had counted 4 men. She had mapped the room, the single bulb, the one door, the high, broken window leaking rain. She had worked her zip-tied wrists raw, testing, and learned the plastic would not give, and so she had stopped wasting strength on it and started watching for the thing she actually needed, which was a mistake. Captors always made one. You waited for it. You used it. A heart that had gone into fibrillation could still be brought back if you kept your head and waited for the rhythm to give you a window. The man who'd spoken on the video was named, she'd gathered, Lo Bianco. He ran the Vandals. He was younger than she'd expected, and angrier, pacing, checking his phone. And as midnight came and went without papers at Sal Mancini's door, his anger curdled into something worried. And that was when Iris understood, with a cold drop in her stomach, that her own survival had just become much less likely. They'd bet Sal would fold. He hadn't, which meant their leverage had failed, which meant, "He's not signing," Lo Bianco said to the room, to no one, to himself. "The arrogant Sicilian son of a bitch isn't signing." He turned and looked at Iris, and the look had changed. The transactional thing was gone. Now it was just rage, looking for a body. "Get the shears." "Mr. Lo Bianco," Iris said, in the steady voice she used to tell parents their child might not survive the night, the voice that had never once cracked. "You should know that I am the only person in this city who can perform a Rastelli procedure on a child with Gia Mancini's anatomy. If you cut my hands off, the girl dies. If the girl dies, there is no negotiation left. You'll have taken the one thing from him that he was willing to deal for. You'll have nothing to sell, and a man with nothing left to lose, hunting you for the rest of your short life." She held his eyes. "I'm not bargaining for myself. I'm telling you the medicine. Hurt my hands, and you've thrown away your only card, and signed your own death warrant. You're not a stupid man. Don't be a stupid man." Lobianco stared at her. The shears hovered. And that was when the lights went out across the entire dock. Not just the bulb, the whole grid, the crane lights, the floods, everything dropped into absolute black. And a half-second later, the first shot punched through the dark, and a man screamed, and the warehouse door blew inward off a breaching charge with a concussion that Iris felt in her sternum. What followed, she would never fully be able to describe, because it happened in the strobing dark in seconds, by muzzle flash, in the particular slow, fast time of catastrophe she knew from the operating table. Sal's men came in low and silent and professional, and the vandals were loud and panicked, and that was the whole story of it. Iris threw herself sideways off the chair the instant the door blew, hitting the concrete hard, making herself small the way she made children small for X-rays. And over her, around her, the room filled with violence. She saw Lobianco raise his gun toward the door, and she saw, in the white stutter of a muzzle flash, Sal Mancini come through that door. He did not come like the philanthropist. He did not come like the man who'd let his daughter paint his nails blue. He came like the thing the city whispered about, the thing in the river, the thing that put men in locked cars in the canal. He came fast and low and absolutely without hesitation, and he put 2 rounds into the gunman beside Lobianco before the man had turned. And then he was on Lobianco himself, and there was a wet, terrible struggle in the dark, and a single shot, muffled, close. And then it was quiet, except for the rain, and one man somewhere groaning, and the ring in Iris's ears. A flashlight clicked on. Marco's men sweeping the room. 4 vandals down, none of Sal's. And Sal crossed the room to her in 3 strides and dropped to his knees on the wet concrete beside her. And his hands, the hands that 30 seconds ago had ended a man, were suddenly the gentlest things she'd ever felt, cradling her bruised face, turning it to the light, his eyes moving over her with a desperation that stripped every facade off him at once. "Your hands," he said. His voice was wrecked. "Show me your hands. Are your hands—" "My hands are fine." She held them up, wrists still zip-tied. "Sal, my hands are fine. Look at me. I'm fine." He took a knife from his belt and cut the ties with a precision that did not so much as graze her skin. And the moment her hands were free, he took them in both of his and pressed them. She would remember this until she died. He pressed her hands flat against his own chest, over his hammering heart, as if he needed to feel his own pulse through her fingers to believe she was real. "I should have signed it over," he said hoarsely. "The terminal. I should have just signed it. If they'd touched your hands, then you'd have proved you could be bought with me, and they'd have come back for me again, and again, and again." Iris's own voice was shaking now, finally the surgeon's calm cracking in the after. "You did the right thing. God help me, you did the right thing, you horrible, dangerous man." He laughed, a broken, disbelieving sound, and pressed his forehead to hers there on the filthy concrete, with 4 dead men cooling around them, and the rain coming through the broken window, and her hands trapped over his heart. "You operate in 5 hours," he murmured, "on my daughter." Then take me home, Iris whispered, so I can wash 4 men off my skin and remember how to be steady, because I am going to fix her heart in the morning, Sal. After all of this, I am still going to fix her heart. And he picked her up off the concrete as though she weighed nothing, and carried her out through the wreckage of the warehouse into the rain, and his men closed around them like a wall, and the river ran black beside them, indifferent, eternal, washing everything toward the gulf. She was, against all odds, steady at 6 a.m. Iris had taught herself a long time ago that the body in crisis and the body in surgery were two different machines, and that a great surgeon learned to flip the switch between them. She had showered the night off her skin in scalding water until her hands stopped shaking. She had not slept, there was no time, but she had done the thing she did instead of sleep, which was to sit in the dark and walk the operation step by step, suture by suture, until the warehouse and the shears and the muffled shot and the feeling of Sal's heart under her palms had all receded behind the clean white wall she built before every case. When she scrubbed in at 5:40, her hands under the running water were absolutely steady. Gia was already under when Iris entered the OR, small and impossibly trusting on the table, Cornelio in his tiny gown tucked under the blue drapes by an indulgent nurse because the anesthesiologist had decided the rabbit could stay. The perfusionist stood ready at the bypass machine, the great breathing and blooding heart that would do Gia's living for her while Iris stopped the real one. "All right," Iris said, and her voice was calm and clear and carried to every person in the room. "Listen to me. This is a hard one. This is the hardest one we've done all year. But we have done hard ones before, and we have done them well, and this little girl is going to wake up this afternoon and be cross with all of us for losing her rabbit, which is why the rabbit stays exactly where it is." A ripple of quiet laughter, the good kind, the kind that loosened shoulders. "Time's out. Patient is Gia Mancini, 7 years. Rastelli repair with conduit placement and VSD closure. Everyone with me?" A chorus of yeses. The clean white wall held. Scalpel. There is a thing that happens to certain people in the place where everyone else falls apart. Soldiers have it. Surgeons have it. Iris had it, in greater measure than anyone she'd ever trained beside. The worse it got, the slower the world ran for her, the quieter her mind became, until there was nothing in the universe but the small, wet field of light under her hands, and the next correct thing to do, and then the next, and then the next. She opened the chest. She placed the cannulas. She gave the word and watched the bypass machine take up the rhythm of Gia's life. Watched the heart she had studied for 11 days finally still under her fingers, the blue, improvised heart, the heart that had fought alone for 7 years. "Cross-clamp on," she said. "Cardioplegia." The heart went quiet. Now there was a clock running. A hard, merciless clock. Every minute that small heart sat still was a minute of borrowed time. And the wall in Iris's mind did not so much as flicker. Because somewhere beyond the OR doors, a man was sitting in a family waiting room, with his hands clasped between his knees, and Iris did not think about him at all, because thinking about him would cost a half-second, and a half-second belonged to the child. She found the ventricular septal defect, the hole between the chambers, and she closed it with a patch, stitch by patient stitch. She built the connection the child had been born without, the conduit, a tube of biological tissue sewn between the right ventricle and the pulmonary arteries, the bridge across the broken place. Her hands did not hurry and did not slow. The anesthesiologist called out numbers in a low, steady voice. The perfusionist watched his machine. The hours folded into the strange, compressed time of the table, where 8 hours could pass like one held breath. There was a moment, there was always a moment, where it nearly went wrong. A bleeder, deep behind the new conduit, the field filling red faster than the suction could clear it. Iris felt the room tighten around her, felt the fear come off the younger resident in waves. "Pressure," she said, calm as still water. "Pack it. Give me a minute. We're not going to panic, because panic doesn't fix anything, and I can already see where it's coming from." Her fingers found the source by feel, in the red, and she placed a single suture exactly where it needed to go, and the field cleared. There. See? Patience. The heart rewards patience. And then, finally, the long, slow climb back. The conduit checked and rechecked, the chambers closed, the cross-clamp off, and the moment every cardiac surgeon lives for and dreads. The moment you ask the stilled heart to remember how to beat. It quivered. It fibrillated, a useless trembling. Paddles, charged to 10. A pause, a jolt. And Gia Mancini's repaired heart, the heart that now had a bridge across its broken place, the heart that for the first time in 7 years did not have to improvise, gathered itself and beat. Once, then again, then into a clean, strong rhythm, pink blood moving the way blood was meant to move, the monitor singing a tone so steady and so ordinary that the whole room exhaled at once. "There she is," Iris murmured, to the heart, to the child, to no one. "There's my brave girl." They came off bypass clean. They closed the chest, and at 2:41 in the afternoon, after 8 hours and 41 minutes, Iris Delacroix peeled off her gloves and her gown and her mask and walked out of the OR on legs that did not quite feel like her own, and the clean white wall in her mind finally came down. And behind it was every single thing she had not let herself feel since a cast-iron skillet and a wet cloth and a concrete floor. She walked into the family waiting room, and Sal Mancini stood up so fast his chair toppled. He did not speak. He could not. He just looked at her, and she watched the question and the terror sitting in him like a man waiting for a sentence. And she put him out of his misery the way she'd put 1,000 parents out of theirs, with the 4 words that meant the world had not ended. "She did beautifully," Iris said. "It worked. Her heart is fixed." For a moment he didn't move. Then something went out of him, the held breath of years, not hours, and this terrible, dangerous man, this killer who had walked through a warehouse full of guns the night before without a flicker, put one hand over his mouth and turned his face away from her so she would not see him break. She let him have the moment. She'd learnt that too. When he turned back, his eyes were wet and his jaw was iron, and his voice, when it came, was steadier than she expected. "Can I see her?" "In recovery. Soon. She'll be groggy. There are tubes, and they'll frighten you, and I need you to not let her see they frighten you. She'll take her cue from your face." Iris hesitated, then said the rest because he deserved it. She came through the hardest part of her whole life today, Sal. The heart's the easy part now. It's fixed. She's going to grow up. She's going to be a teenager who's embarrassed by you. She's going to do all of it. He looked at her for a long, long moment, and there was something in his face she had no name for, something past gratitude, something that frightened her more than the warehouse had. "You were kidnapped 12 hours ago," he said quietly. "You had a man hold shears to your hands. And then you walked into that room and gave my daughter a future." He shook his head slowly. "I have known a great many people, Dr. Delacroix. Powerful people, dangerous people. I have never in my life met anyone like you." "I'm going to go check on my patient," Iris said, because if she stayed in that room one more second, she was going to do something unforgivable, like cry, like step toward him, like let the warmth under her ribs become a fire. "Get some coffee. Sit with her when they let you. And Sal," she paused at the door, "we still need to talk. About the scars. You promised me when she was safe. She's safe now." His face closed just slightly. The shadow she'd seen in the clinic moved behind his eyes again. "I know," he said. "Tonight, after she's settled, I'll tell you everything." A beat. "And then you'll understand why I went into that warehouse instead of signing a piece of paper. Because I have already, once before in my life, made the other choice. I have already once chosen the easy thing over the person I loved." His voice dropped to almost nothing. "I buried her for it. I'm not going to do it again." And he walked past her toward the recovery room and his daughter, and left Iris standing in the doorway with her heart doing the arrhythmic thing again, and a cold understanding settling over her like the first edge of the truth she'd been circling since the moment her hands stopped over an old silver scar. The paediatric ICU at night was a hushed cathedral of soft beeps and dimmed light, and in a glass-walled room near the end of it, Gia Mancini slept the deep chemical sleep of the recently repaired. Small and pale against the white sheets, a forest of tubes and wires growing out of her, the monitor above her singing its steady, ordinary song. Cornelio had survived surgery too, and sat propped on the pillow beside her in his little gown. Sal sat in the chair beside the bed where he had sat for 6 hours, not moving, watching the rise and fall of his daughter's chest, as though his attention were the thing keeping it going. He had sent his men home. He had sent Marco home, over Marco's objections. "Nobody knows we're here. The floor's locked down. Go sleep. That's an order." He wanted, for reasons he could not fully name, to be alone when he told her. Iris came at 11, in fresh scrubs, having gone home only long enough to shower and check that the new lock on her broken door held. She'd told herself she was coming back to check the patient. She had checked the patient at the nurse's station from the chart, which she could have done from her phone. She came into the glass room anyway. "Her numbers are perfect," she said softly, so as not to wake the child. "I know. I've been reading the monitor for 6 hours. I've taught myself what every line means." He didn't look away from his daughter. "The top one is her heart. It's never been that shape before, that clean. I keep watching it and thinking, that's what it was supposed to look like. The whole time. That's what she was supposed to have." Iris pulled the second chair close and sat. For a while, neither of them spoke, and the monitor sang, and the city glowed beyond the window, 40 floors of hospital below them. You said tonight, Iris said finally. Sal was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached over and very gently drew the sheet down an inch to expose his sleeping daughter's small shoulder and the fine silver scar that ran along her ribs, the one Iris had seen in clinic and filed in the cold, clean part of her mind. This one, he said, she got when she was 3. The other, the one on her back, when she was 4. His voice was flat, controlled, the voice of a man reading a confession he'd rehearsed in hell. Both times she fell. That part is true. But she fell because the man who had her in his arms threw her. My cousin. Drunk both times. The first time he said it was an accident. The second time he laughed. Iris's stomach turned over. Sal, let me finish. I've never said it out loud. If I stop, I won't start again. He drew the sheet gently back up over Gia's shoulder, tucking it, the gesture of a careful father at war with the words coming out of his mouth. My family is not a metaphor, Dr. Delacroix. It's a corporation and an army and a religion, and at the top of it, when I was young, was my father. And when he died, by the rules of the thing, it should have passed to me. But I was 26, and I'd just married a girl from the neighbourhood my family thought was beneath us, and my uncle, my father's brother, Tommaso, convinced the others I was too soft to lead. So they let me have a title and the port and the foundation and the public face, and they kept the real power for Tommaso, the drugs, the weapons, the killing. I run the clean half, he runs the rest, and the rest has always run me. He looked finally at Iris. My wife's name was Lucia. Gia has her hair. A muscle worked in his jaw. Lucia hated this life. She'd known what my family was when she married me. Everyone in the neighbourhood knew. But she thought I could leave it. She thought we could leave it, take the baby and go, start over somewhere clean. And the truth is, Iris. His voice finally cracked, the first crack, hairline. The truth is, I wanted to. I wanted to so badly. We made plans, real plans, passports, a house in a country with no extradition. We were 3 weeks from going. The monitor sang. Gia breathed. Tommaso found out. I'll never know how. Maybe he always knew. And he came to me, and he sat in my kitchen, and he told me, very calmly, that no one leaves the family. That the family is blood, and blood doesn't leave, it only spills. And then he looked at Lucia at the stove with our daughter on her hip, and he said... Sal stopped. His hands had gone white at the knuckles. He said, a wife who wants to take a man's child away from his blood is a problem the blood solves itself. And I should have killed him in my kitchen right then. I had a gun in the drawer 6 feet away. I had the chance, and I didn't, because he was my father's brother, because he held half the family, because I told myself he was only talking, because I was a coward, Iris, because I was a coward. Sal. Iris had moved without meaning to. Her hand was on his arm. 2 weeks later, Lucia's car went off the Crescent City connection into the river. They called it an accident. Wet road, lost control. There was an investigation, and the investigation found exactly what Tommaso paid it to find. His voice was utterly steady now, which was worse than any breaking. I knew. I knew the second they told me. I looked at my uncle at the funeral, and he looked back at me, and he smiled, just slightly, the way he smiled at the gala when he saw me watching you. You didn't know he was there, but he was, watching from the upper window. And he let me see that he knew, that I knew, and he let me see that there was nothing I would do about it. And he was right. There was nothing I did about it. For 3 years I've sat at the same table as the man who murdered my wife and called him uncle and passed him the bread. He turned his face away. That's the guilt I carry every day, Dr. Delacroix, not the men in the river. Those men chose the life, the way I chose it. The guilt is Lucia. The guilt is that I had a gun in a drawer and a chance to save the only person who ever wanted me to be good, and I chose the easy thing, the safe thing, the coward's thing, and she died for it. And my daughter has 2 scars from a man I let live. He looked back at her, and his eyes were dry now and terrible. So when those men put shears next to your hands and asked me to choose between you and a piece of paper, do you understand now why there was never a choice? I have already once let the world take a woman He caught himself at the cliff of the word, a woman I should have protected because I was afraid of my own family. I am not going to do it twice. I would burn the whole family down before I let them touch you. And the terrible thing, Iris, the thing you should run from, is that I think I might want to burn it down anyway. For her. For Lucia. And now also for you. The glass room was very quiet. The monitor sang. The child slept, healed, between them. And Iris Delacroix, who had spent her whole life building walls against exactly this, looked at the most dangerous and broken man she had ever met, and did not run. Then we're going to need, she said quietly, a much better plan than burning. Iris should have walked away. She told herself this on the drive home at 2 in the morning, the empty city sliding past, the street lights smearing in the rain. She told herself this lying awake in her grandmother's house with the new lock on the door and the dent in the wall where the skillet had hit. She told herself this the next morning, scrubbing in for a routine atrial septal defect on a 4-year-old, her hands as steady as ever, her mind anything but. She knew now. She knew the whole shape of it. A murdered wife, a coward's 3-year silence, an uncle who smiled at funerals, scars on a sleeping child. She had crossed a line no physician should cross. She had become a keeper of a crime's secret, a confidant to a man whose family killed women for the sin of wanting out. The smart thing, the safe thing, the thing her mother would have wanted was to discharge the patient on schedule, hand off post-op care to the team, and never see Salvatore Mancini again. She did not do the smart thing. She came back to the ICU every evening that week. She told herself it was the case. Gia's recovery was textbook, but Iris was protective of her hardest saves. And that was true, and it was also a lie, because she found herself lingering in the glass room long after the child was asleep, sitting in the second chair, talking with Sal in the low voices people use in churches and sick rooms. She learned things about him that did not fit the file. She learned he'd taught himself to read English from comic books in a Palermo basement. She learned he could cook, really cook, the kind of cooking that came from a grandmother and a wood stove, and that he'd once made Gia an entire birthday feast himself because he didn't trust the catering not to be poisoned. And the absurd domesticity of that, a mob boss anxiously timing risotto for terror of assassins, made Iris laugh until she had to put her hand over her mouth so as not to wake the child. She learned the cold was a costume, not a lie exactly. The dangerous thing in him was real. She'd seen it work in the dark of the warehouse. But the cold was armour, worn so long it had fused to the skin, and underneath it was a man who had loved exactly 2 women in his life and lost one to his own cowardice, and was now, helplessly, against all sense, falling for the second. He didn't say it. He was too careful, too aware of the power he held over her patient, her safety, her city. He never once used any of it. He never tried to touch her. He kept a courtier's distance and a bodyguard's vigilance, and he let her come to the line and never once pulled her across it. And somehow that restraint was more devastating than any seduction could have been, because it meant he understood exactly what he was, and he was trying, with everything in him, to be worth more than that around her. On the 5th evening, Gia woke up. Really woke, not the groggy surfacing of the post-op days, but awake herself, cross about the tubes, and demanding to know where her rabbit had been, and why everyone was being so weird. And when she saw Iris in the doorway, her whole face lit up. "Dr. Iris, Papa says you fixed my clock." "I did." Iris came and sat on the edge of the bed. "I opened it up, and I set all the gears right, and now it ticks perfectly. Want to hear?" She warmed the stethoscope against her palm. Gia remembered the ritual, grinned, and let the child listen to her own repaired heart, the clean, strong rhythm, and Gia's eyes went wide with wonder. "It sounds different. It sounds fixed. That's what fixed sounds like." And Gia, with the devastating directness of children, looked from Iris to her father and back and said, "Are you going to marry my papa?" The glass room went very still. "Gia," Sal said, strangled. "Marco said," the child began, delighted at the chaos she'd created. "Marco," Sal said grimly, "talks too much and is fired." "You can't fire Marco. He's family." Gia turned her enormous dark eyes back to Iris, undeterred. "He said, 'Papa looks at you like you hung the moon.' What does that mean?" Iris's face was warm. Sal had gone a remarkable shade, and Iris, because there was a sick child in a bed who'd been through hell and deserved an answer, said gently, "It means your papa and I are friends. Good friends. And friends look at each other kindly. Now, I need to listen to your lungs, and I need you to take the biggest breath in the whole world, like you're going to blow out 100 candles. Ready?" The moment passed, swallowed by the breath, by the exam, by the ordinary mercy of medicine. But later, walking Iris out, in the hush of the corridor by the elevators, Sal stopped. "I owe you an apology for that," he said. She's perceptive," Iris said. "She gets it from somewhere." He looked at her. The elevator hummed somewhere below. "Iris," his voice was low, "I'm not going to pretend I don't know what's happening here. I've spent 20 years reading people for a living. It's how I'm still alive. So I know what I feel, and I'm not a man who lies to himself about facts, even when the facts are inconvenient." He paused. "But I also know exactly what I am, and exactly what loving me costs a woman, because there's a woman at the bottom of the Mississippi who paid the full price. So I'm not going to say the thing I want to say. I'm not going to put you in front of my family like a target, the way I put Lucia. I'm going to fix it first. The whole thing. And if there's anything left of me when it's done, anything you'd want, then I'll say it. Not before. The elevator arrived. Iris stepped in. She held the door. Sal, she said, 2 things. She held up one finger. You don't get to decide for me what loving you costs. I'm a grown woman who walked into a warehouse and an OR in the same 12 hours. I assess my own risks. A second finger. And the man who murdered Lucia is the same man who is now watching me. Because Renzo wasn't wrong, was he? I've become your weakness, which means I'm already a target. The plan can't be fix it first and protect Iris by keeping her out of it. The plan has to include me because I'm already in it, whether you decided that or not. The doors began to close. He put his hand out and stopped them, and for a moment they stood there, his hand on the door, 6 inches between them, the closest they had ever been. You really are, he said quietly, the most impossible woman I have ever met. I know, Iris said. Now take your hand off the door before someone needs this elevator. And Sal, the doors slid as he stepped back, start telling me about your uncle. Everything. If we're going to take down a man who murders people for wanting out, I need to know exactly what we're dealing with. The doors closed on his face and on the first real, unguarded, astonished smile she had ever seen him give. Tommaso Mancini did not look like a man who killed women. He looked like a retired professor or a kindly grandfather, or the sort of elegant old Italian who fed pigeons in a piazza. He was 71 years old, silver-haired and beautifully dressed, with his late brother's green-grey eyes and a voice like warm honey, and he had personally ordered the deaths of more people than most wars, and he had never once lost a night's sleep over any of them. He summoned Sal to lunch the day after Gia came home from the hospital. The restaurant was an old-line Creole institution in the quarter, the kind with a private upstairs room and waiters who'd worked there for 40 years and knew which tables never appeared on any reservation list. Tommaso was already seated when Sal arrived, a bottle of Barolo open and breathing, 2 glasses poured. Salvatore. Tommaso rose, embraced him, kissed both cheeks. He smelled of bergamot and cigars. Sit, sit. You look tired. The child, she's home? Recovered? She's home. Sal sat. He did not touch the wine. She's recovering. Wonderful, wonderful. A miracle of modern medicine. Tommaso settled back, swirled his glass. And the doctor, the Creole woman with the famous hands, she must be quite something to do what she did. A pause, perfectly timed. I hear she's been visiting, after hours, every night in fact, even now the child is home. And there it was. Sal kept his face, the smooth blank he'd worn since boyhood at this man's table. She's monitoring the recovery. Tommaso sipped. When I was young, Salvatore, a man in our position understood that the people he was seen with became extensions of him, weaknesses or strengths, but never neutral. You're a widower with a public face and a foundation and a great deal of goodwill. A man like that, if he were to take up with a doctor, a respectable woman, a civilian, people would read things into it, your enemies especially. He set down the glass. The kindly grandfather was still there in the face, but something had moved behind the eyes, something reptile cold. The vandals already read something into it, didn't they? They took her right out of her kitchen, and you went and got her back yourself with half your men over a piece of paper, over a terminal. He shook his head, almost fondly. That was sentiment, Salvatore. Sentiment is expensive. Your father never let sentiment near a business decision. My father, Sal said evenly, is dead, and the terminal is worth 80 million a year, which is not sentiment, it's arithmetic. Tommaso smiled, and it was the funeral smile, the one Sal had seen across Lucia's casket, and the sight of it after 3 years still made something ancient and murderous turn over in Sal's chest. You always were clever with the numbers, Tommaso said. But let me speak plainly, nephew, the way family should. The doctor has become a liability. The vandals see it, soon everyone will. A man cannot run even the clean half of this family with a soft spot the whole city can see. He leaned forward, and the warmth dropped entirely out of his voice, and for one moment Sal saw the thing underneath, the thing that had sat in his kitchen and called his wife a problem the blood would solve. So here is what's going to happen. You're going to thank the woman, pay her bill, and let her go back to her hospital and her people and her life. You're going to do it this week, cleanly, kindly, if you like. I'm not a barbarian, but you're going to do it. He sat back, warm again, refilling his own glass. Because we both remember what happens to women who get too close to this family and want things they shouldn't. We both remember how messy it gets. And neither of us wants anything messy to happen to a woman as gifted as Dr. Delacroix. Do we? The threat was so naked, so calmly delivered over a glass of Barolo, that for a moment Sal could not breathe around the rage. He had imagined, many times over 3 years, killing this man. He had imagined it in detail, in the dark, on the nights he could not sleep for the sight of the funeral smile. He could do it now. He had a gun at his back, and the upstairs room was private, and the waiters knew how to forget. But Tommaso held half the family. Kill him here, sloppily, in rage, and the war would come down on Sal and Gia and Iris from 20 directions at once, and Sal would be dead within a week, and Gia would be raised by the very people who'd murdered her mother. He had learned, at terrible cost, the difference between the satisfying choice and the right one. So he did the hardest thing he had ever done. He smiled back. "You're right, of course," Sal said, and made his voice tired and reasonable, the voice of a chastened nephew. "I let it get away from me. The girl was sick. I was frightened. The doctor was kind. I confused gratitude for something more. It happens to widowers." He picked up his wine at last and drank, and did not let his hand shake. "I'll handle it. Cleanly. Give me a week to do it without drama. She has friends at the hospital. The foundation has the gala coming. I don't want headlines. A week." Tommaso studied him for a long moment, and Sal held the gaze and let his uncle read exactly what he wanted to read. Weakness. Compliance. A soft man bending back into shape. "A week," Tommaso agreed at last, and lifted his glass. "To family, Salvatore. The only thing that lasts. The only thing that's real." "To family," Sal said, and touched his glass to his uncle's, and smiled the funeral smile right back at him, and thought, with a cold clarity that would have frightened Iris far more than the warehouse had. "I am going to destroy you. Not kill you. Destroy you. Take everything. The family, the power, the freedom, the name. I am going to hand you to the Americans and the Italians in pieces and let them bury you alive in a cell for the rest of your miserable life. And the last thing you'll see before they close the door is that I did it, and that I did it for her, for both of them, and that there was nothing in the end that the blood could solve." A week. I can do a great deal in a week. He left the restaurant smiling, embraced his uncle on the sidewalk, and the moment Tommaso's car pulled away, Sal took out his phone and called the one man in the world he trusted, and said 3 words that set everything in motion. "Marco, it's time." "You want to do what?" Marco said. They were in the safe house Sal kept that no one in the family knew about, a nondescript double in mid-city, bought through 4 shell companies, swept for bugs weekly, the place Sal had set aside years ago for the day he finally found the courage he'd lacked in his kitchen. The day had come. "I want to bring the whole thing down," Sal said, "from the inside, and I want to hand the inside to the federal government on a silver plate. The Americans for the American operations, the Italians for Tommaso and the Sicilian half, everything. The shipments, the routes, the bank accounts, the bodies, Lucia, all of it." Marco sat down heavily. He had been with Sal for 15 years. He had killed for him. He had bled for him. And now he looked at his oldest friend like the man had lost his mind. "They'll kill us. Both of us. Slowly. You understand that? You turn evidence on this family. There is no hole deep enough." "I'm not turning evidence and staying to take the bullet, Marco. I'm not a martyr. I have a daughter." Sal spread a map on the table. Not a real map, a structure, an org chart of an empire drawn in his own precise hand, names in boxes, arrows of money and blood. "I'm doing it the smart way, the way Tommaso would do it, if Tommaso ever turned on anyone. Quietly, completely. I've spent 3 years pretending to be the soft, harmless, clean half-nephew. Do you know what that bought me? It bought me access. I'm the public face. I'm the one who deals with the banks, the lawyers, the legitimate fronts. I've had my hands on the paper of this family for 3 years, while Tommaso ran the streets. And paper, Marco." Sal tapped the map. "Paper is what convicts people, not bodies. Bodies wash away in the river. Paper doesn't." Marco stared at the map. Slowly his expression changed from disbelief to something closer to awe. "You've been building this," he said quietly, "the whole time. The foundation, the clean books, the public face. You weren't going soft. You were building a case." "I started the week after Lucia's funeral," Sal said, and his voice was very quiet. "I sat at the table with the man who killed her, and I smiled. And I decided that I would never have the courage to put a gun in his face. I'd already proven that. But that there was another kind of courage I might be able to learn. The slow kind, the patient kind, the kind that takes years and never gets to feel good." He looked up. "Iris told me something. She said, when she was operating, that the heart rewards patience, that panic doesn't fix anything. I've thought about that every day since. I've been patient for 3 years, Marco. I have records of everything. Offshore accounts. The judge Tommaso owns, the cops on the payroll, the shipment manifests that don't match the cargo. I have a flash drive in a safe deposit box in a bank in Switzerland that could put 40 men in prison. He paused. What I didn't have, until 2 weeks ago, was a reason to finally use it. A reason worth dying for, if it came to that. And now you have one. Now I have two. Sal's jaw tightened. Tommaso threatened Iris at lunch today, calmly, over wine, the same way he talked about Lucia. He gave me a week to get rid of her, or He couldn't finish it. So the patience is over. The week he gave me to break her heart? I'm going to use it to break his empire. I need you with me, Marco. I can't do this alone. You're the only man in this family I trust with my daughter's life, which means you're the only one I trust with this. Marco was quiet for a long time. Then he reached across the table and gripped Sal's forearm, hard, the old gesture from Palermo, from when they were young and stupid and the world was simple. Lucia made me her boy's godfather, Marco said roughly. Did you know that? Before. She asked me, she said, Marco, if anything ever happens, you make sure Gia knows who her mother really was, not who this family says. His eyes were wet. I've carried that 3 years too, brother. I'm in. God help us both. I'm in. The plan had 3 faces, and Iris insisted on knowing all of them. She came to the safe house the next night. Sal had argued against it, had been overruled, had given up arguing because he was learning that arguing with Iris Delacroix was a way of losing time he could have spent doing what she wanted anyway. And she sat at the table with the map of an empire spread out, and she listened, and she asked the cold, clear questions she asked before a surgery, the questions that found the bleeders before they bled. What's your timeline? Real one. 10 days, maybe less. Tommaso gave me a week to push you away. When the week ends and you're still here, he stops asking and starts solving. So everything has to be in federal hands before then. Once the indictments come down and the arrests happen, he can't touch us. He'll be in a cell, and the family will be in chaos, every man for himself. And in the 10 days before that, while he still thinks you're his obedient, soft nephew? In the 10 days before that, Sal said, we are in the most dangerous position of our lives, because I have to keep him believing I'm pushing you away while I'm actually building the case that buries him, which means, his face tightened, which means for the next 10 days you have to disappear, officially. You and I are seen to end whatever Tommaso thinks we are. You hand off Gia's care to your team, you tell the hospital you're taking leave, and you go somewhere no one in my family can find you, with 2 of my men who'd die before they let anyone near you. No, Iris said. Iris, no, listen to me. She leaned forward, and her voice was the OR voice, calm and absolute. You want to fake a breakup to protect me. I understand the logic, but you're forgetting that I'm not the only one who's already in this. Gia is in this. That child has a fragile new heart, and a father about to wage war on his own family. And if this goes wrong, if you're arrested or killed, she needs someone. So here's what's actually going to happen. She put her finger on the map, on the empty space beyond the boxes and arrows. You're going to get Gia out first, before any of it, somewhere safe, somewhere far, with people we trust. And I'm going to go with her. Not to hide Sal, to protect her. She just had open heart surgery. She needs a doctor with her, and there is no doctor on this earth more invested in that child's heart than I am. You hand the case to the feds. I keep your daughter alive and far away while you do it. And when it's over, her voice didn't waver, when it's over, you come find us, both of us, wherever we are. Sal looked at her across the map of his ruined empire, this woman who would not hide, who turned his protection inside out and made it a mission, who had walked into every dangerous room in his life and refused every single time to leave it. "You'd take her," he said slowly. "You'd run with my daughter into God knows what for a man you've known 3 weeks." "I'd take my patient," Iris corrected, "to keep her alive. And I'd do it for the man I'm apparently foolish enough to be falling for. Yes." She said it plainly, like a diagnosis, and watched it land on him like a blow. There. Now we've both almost said it. "Where do we send her, Sal?" "Somewhere your family has no reach. Somewhere with good hospitals, in case her heart needs anything. Somewhere you know." And Sal Mancini, staring at the woman who had just turned his whole careful world over with 6 sentences, said the name of the only place on earth that was his and not the family's, the place he'd been quietly building an escape toward for 3 years, the city of water and masks and old, patient revenge. "Venice," he said. "We send her to Venice." The next 9 days were a held breath. To the world, and to Tommaso, Salvatore Mancini was a man quietly doing what he'd been told. He was seen at the foundation. He was seen ending things, a curt phone call to the hospital, overheard by the right people, in which he thanked Dr. Delacroix for her service and made clear her involvement with his family was concluded. He was seen, once, having a tense final conversation with the doctor herself in the hospital parking garage, the two of them at a cold, professional distance, and the man Tommaso had watching reported back that it was done, the soft spot excised, the nephew obedient. The man Tommaso had watching did not know that the entire conversation had been staged for his benefit, that the cold words were a script, that the moment the watcher's sightline broke, Sal had pressed a slip of paper into Iris's hand with a flight number on it, and his fingers had lingered on hers a half-second too long for either of their composure. Beneath the held breath, machinery turned. Sal flew to Zurich for 11 hours, a legitimate foundation trip fully documented, and came back with the flash drive from the safe deposit box. He met in a parking structure in Houston that no one could connect to anyone, with 2 people, a special agent from the FBI's Organized Crime Task Force and the magistrate's liaison from the Italian Direzione Investigativa Antimafia, the DIA, who had been hunting the Sicilian half of the Mancini family for 2 decades and had never once gotten a witness from the inside. Sal gave them nothing that day but a taste, a single account number, a single name, enough to prove what he had was real, and a list of demands. He wanted 3 things: full immunity, witness protection that he and Marco would design themselves because he trusted no protection program with his daughter's life, and custody, ironclad, internationally recognized custody of Gia, with all Mancini family claims to the child legally severed. In exchange, he would give them everything. The largest organized crime case in the history of either country. 40-odd men, 2 decades of evidence, and the murder of Lucia Mancini with the man who ordered it. They said yes to almost all of it. They always said yes when the prize was that big. The lawyers worked through nights. Papers were drawn in 3 jurisdictions, and the clock ran down. Gia left on day 4. She did not know she was leaving forever. She knew only that she was going on an adventure to a city made of water with Dr. Iris and Uncle Marco, and that Cornelio was coming too, and that Papa would join them very soon. Sal had explained it as a holiday, a reward for being so brave about her heart. And the child, still tired, still healing, still trusting the world the way only a loved child can, accepted it completely. The hardest moment of Salvatore Mancini's life was not the warehouse. It was not the lunch with Tommaso. It was the private terminal at 6 in the morning, kneeling on the tarmac to be at his daughter's level, holding her small face in his enormous hands, knowing that if anything went wrong in the next 6 days, this might be the last time he ever saw her, and not being able to let her see one flicker of that on his face. "Be good for Dr. Iris," he said. "Listen to your heart, the new one, the fixed one. If it ever feels strange, you tell her right away." "I will." "And eat your vegetables in the city of water." Papa. Long-suffering, 7 years old. And his voice nearly went, and he held it for her. "And I love you more than the whole ocean, more than the river, more than there is water in the world. Remember that, no matter what anyone ever tells you about me. You remember that I love you, and that everything I ever did, I did so that you could grow up. All right?" "All right, Papa." She kissed his cheek. She had no idea she was sealing a vow. "See you in the water city." He stood and watched her walk up the steps of the jet holding Marco's hand, and at the top she turned and waved, framed in the doorway with the grey dawn behind her, and Sal Mancini lifted his hand and held it up until the door closed and the jet taxied away and carried his entire heart across the Atlantic. Iris was the last up the steps. She stopped at the bottom and looked back at him, and for a moment neither of them performed anything. 6 days, she said. 6 days, he agreed. Maybe less. "Don't die, Sal." Her voice was steady, but her eyes were not. "I have spent 2 weeks getting attached to the idea of you surviving this. Don't make me wrong. I hate being wrong." He crossed the distance between them. He had told himself he wouldn't. He'd kept the line for 2 weeks, the courtier's distance, the bodyguard's restraint. But she was about to fly across an ocean with his daughter and his whole future, and the line suddenly seemed like the stupidest thing he'd ever respected. He took her face in his hands the way he'd held his daughter's, and he kissed her, once, hard, brief, a kiss with the whole weight of 3 years of silence and 2 weeks of restraint and a lifetime of being too late behind it. And then he stepped back, before either of them could fall the rest of the way. "That," he said low, "was so that if I do die, I won't have died never having done it. Now get on the plane, Dr. Delacroix. Take care of my daughter, and keep yourself alive, because the very second this is finished, I am coming to Venice, and I am going to do that again, properly, for as long as you'll let me." Iris pressed her fingers to her lips once, and then she turned and climbed the steps, because if she didn't do it right then, she wasn't going to do it at all. And the door closed, and Sal Mancini stood alone on the tarmac in the grey New Orleans dawn and watched the last of everything he loved lift off the runway and bank east toward the rising sun. Then he wiped his face, and he straightened his suit, and he became the cold thing again, the soft, obedient nephew. And he drove back into the city to spend the next 6 days building the bomb that would bury his uncle. Venice received them like a dream that wasn't sure it wanted to be one. They came in by water taxi from the airport, across the lagoon at dusk, the boat carving a white wake through pewter water. And Gia pressed her face to the glass and gasped as the impossible city rose out of the sea. Domes and bell towers and palaces standing in the water, as though the water had agreed centuries ago to hold them up forever. The light was going gold and rose. The air smelled of salt and stone and something older. "It's floating," Gia breathed. "It's been floating for 1,000 years," Iris said, her own breath caught. She had seen photographs. Photographs were lies. Nothing prepared you for the thing itself, the audacity of it, a civilization built on water out of pure stubbornness and beauty. The safe house was not a safe house in any sense Gia would recognize. It was a piano nobile, the grand floor of a 16th-century palazzo on a quiet side canal in Dorsoduro, away from the tourist crush, with frescoed ceilings and tall windows that opened onto a small private water gate where the boat slid in out of sight. Sal had owned it for 3 years through a Liechtenstein trust under a name that connected to nothing. It was the bolt hole he'd been building toward since Lucia's funeral, furnished and ready, waiting for the day he found the nerve. Now it held his daughter, his doctor and Marco, and 4 more of his most trusted men quietly stationed in the surrounding Cali. For 6 days, while an ocean away the case came together, Venice gave them something that felt unbearably like a life. Iris fell into a rhythm. She woke early and checked Gia's incision and listened to the clean, strong heart and adjusted the medications and recorded the numbers. She arranged through a contact a quiet consult with a pediatric cardiologist at the Ospedale Civile, just in case, and the Italian doctor reviewed the films and pronounced the surgical work magnifico, perfetto, and asked who had done it. And Iris said, "I did." And the man looked at her with the specific respect of one craftsman for another. And in the long gold afternoons, between the medical vigilance and the ambient fear, there was Venice. There was Gia, growing stronger by the day, well enough now to walk, slowly, carefully, a hand always near, across a little bridge to a campo where she fed pigeons and ate a gelato the size of her head. There was Marco, vast and watchful, teaching her Italian swear words when Iris wasn't listening, and innocent ones when she was. There was the light on the water, and the bells, and the strange suspended peace of a place that did not know or care who any of them had been. At night, when Gia slept, Iris stood at the tall windows and looked out at the canal and waited for her phone to light up. And every night it did, briefly, a message from across the ocean. Never anything incriminating, just proof of life, still standing. She safe? And Iris, safe, strong. She fed 40 pigeons today. How long? And Sal, soon, days. Hold on. On the 4th night, the message was different. Tomorrow it ends here. The feds move on the American side at dawn. The Italians take Tommaso when he lands in Palermo. He's flying back for a family meeting, doesn't know it's a trap. By this time tomorrow it's over, and I'm on a plane to you. Tell Gia I'll be there for breakfast the day after. Tell her I love her more than the water. And Iris, a pause, the 3 dots appearing and disappearing. Keep her close tomorrow, all day. Don't let her out of your sight. I don't think anything can reach you there. But I didn't think anything could reach Lucia either. Tomorrow's the dangerous day. Once Tommaso knows the trap is closing, he'll want to hurt me. And you two are the only way left to do it. So tomorrow, please, stay inside. Stay close. Let Marco do his job. One more day. Iris read it standing at the window with the canal black and glittering below, and a cold finger traced down her spine, because she had learned to trust this man's instincts about danger the way her patients trusted hers about hearts. One more day, she wrote back. We'll stay inside. Finish it, Sal. Come home to us. Home, he wrote back after a moment. I like that word in your mouth. And then nothing more, because there was a war to finish and an ocean to cross and one more dangerous day to survive. Iris stood at the window a long time. Behind her in the great frescoed room, Gia slept with Cornelio under her chin and her fixed heart beating its clean, strong song. Somewhere out in the dark labyrinth of the city, 4 of Sal's men kept watch on the bridges and the water gates, and across the lagoon the lights of the mainland glittered, and beyond them all of Europe, and beyond that an ocean, and beyond that a man in New Orleans about to set fire to his own life to buy them a clean one. She did not know that the most dangerous day was not tomorrow. She did not know that Tommaso Mancini, who had spent 50 years surviving in a world that ate the careless, had not booked that flight to Palermo by accident, that he had known for 3 days that his obedient nephew was talking to the Americans, that there was a man inside the FBI task force who took Mancini money the way half of New Orleans took Mancini money, and that the trap Sal thought he was setting had already been turned inside out. She did not know that Tommaso was not flying to Palermo at all. She did not know that at that very moment an old man with silver hair and her surgeon's same green-grey eyes was stepping off a private jet at Marco Polo Airport into the City of Water, with 6 men and a single, simple purpose: to take from his nephew the 2 things the boy loved, the way he should have done it 3 years ago, the way the blood always, in the end, solved its own problems. The first thing that went wrong was the silence. Iris woke before dawn on the dangerous day with the particular instinct of someone who has spent 20 years being woken by emergencies, and the wrongness of it reached her before her conscious mind did. The palazzo was too quiet. Not the deep quiet of a sleeping house, a different quiet, a held quiet, an absence where presence should be. She got up. She checked Gia first, always first. The child slept, the small chest rising and falling, the monitor she'd rigged showing the clean rhythm. And then she went to the door of the grand room and listened. Nothing. No footsteps from Marco's nightly patrol of the Piano Nobile, no murmur of the man who should have been stationed at the Watergate. She took her phone and texted Marco 2 rooms away. "You up?" No reply. No delivered receipt. The cold finger on her spine became a hand. She did not panic. Panic doesn't fix anything. She'd built a career on that. She woke Gia gently, pressed a finger to her own lips, and in a low, calm voice told the child they were going to play the quiet game, the most important quiet game ever, where they moved through the house like cats and didn't make a single sound. Gia, half asleep and trusting, nodded. Iris gathered the child's medications into her jacket pockets by feel. She put Gia's shoes on the child's feet. She wrapped her in the dark blanket from the bed. And then she did the thing Sal had drilled into her over the phone on the second night. The thing she'd half listened to and half dismissed as a dangerous man's paranoia. If it ever goes wrong, there's a second boat under the water gate, the small one, and a key on the ledge above the door. Get to the water. Water is faster than the Kali for anyone who doesn't know the city, and Tommaso's men won't know the city. Iris lifted Gia onto her hip. The child was light, too light, still healing, and moved through the frescoed dark toward the back of the palazzo. She found the first man in the corridor. He was one of Sal's. She recognized the bulk of him, slumped against the wall in a black pool that the dim canal light coming through the windows turned to oil. She did not let Gia see. She pressed the child's face into her shoulder and stepped over him and kept moving, her heart slamming, but her hands, when she reached for the next door, perfectly steady. The O.R. hands, the hands that didn't shake. Iris. The voice came from the shadows of the great salon, low and warm and elegant, a voice like honey poured over a blade, and she knew it instantly, though she'd never heard it, because it was the voice from her nightmares for 2 weeks, the voice that had threatened her over Barolo through Sal's retelling. Dr. Delacroix, please, don't run. There's no point, and running makes everyone clumsy. The lights came up. Tommaso Mancini sat in a tall carved chair by the cold fireplace, as though he'd been waiting there all night, which he had. He was beautifully dressed, silver hair perfect, hands folded in his lap, and around the room stood 4 men with guns held low and easy, and on the floor near the window, bound and bleeding from a cut above his eye, but alive, thank God, was Marco, gagged, his eyes blazing with helpless fury. There she is, Tommaso said pleasantly, and his green-grey eyes, Sal's eyes, Gia's eyes, the family's eyes, moved to the child on Iris's hip and softened into something monstrous in its tenderness. And little Gia, my great niece, how big you've gotten, how well you look. He smiled. What a clever doctor you have. Don't look at her, Iris said. Her voice was the O.R. voice, flat and absolute, the voice that ran rooms where people were dying. Whatever you came here to do, you do it without looking at her like that. Tommaso tilted his head, intrigued. You're not afraid? I'm extremely afraid, Iris said. I've just learned not to let it move my hands. Now, Marco's hurt, and your man in the hall is going to bleed out in about 11 minutes if no one helps him, and that man is family to you, isn't he? Blood. So before you do whatever theatre you've planned, let me make this simple. The child has a fragile heart. She had open-heart surgery 16 days ago. If you frighten her, if her heart rate spikes, she can decompensate. Do you understand what that means? It means the surgery I just did can fail, right here, right now, on this floor, and there is no one in this city who can fix it as fast as me, and I will not lift a finger to save her if your men touch me. So whatever you want her calm, and you want me whole. That's your situation. Now what do you actually want, Mr. Mancini? Tommaso regarded her with frank, delighted astonishment, the way a collector regards an unexpected masterpiece. "My God," he said softly, "I see it now. I see exactly what happened to my nephew." He rose from the chair, slow, elegant, and waved his men back when they tensed. He didn't fall for a pretty face. He's surrounded by pretty faces. He fell for this. A woman who walks into a room full of guns and starts giving orders. He sighed, almost regretful. "It's a shame, really. In another life, I'd have wanted you in this family. You'd have run it better than any of them. Better than Salvatore, certainly. He has a good mind, but a weak stomach. You," he studied her, "you have both." "What do you want?" Iris repeated. "What I want," Tommaso said, and the warmth went out of him all at once, the way it had at the lunch, the reptile surfacing, "is for my nephew to learn a lesson he failed to learn the first time. The lesson is very simple. It is the only law that has ever mattered in this family." He walked toward her, unhurried, and his men did not move, and the gunlight gleamed on the frescoes of saints and angels 3 centuries dead. "No one leaves, not a wife, not a nephew, not a child. The blood does not let go." Salvatore thought he could take his daughter and run to a city of water and start a clean little life with his clever doctor. He thought he could call the Americans and bury his own family and walk away with everything he loved intact. Tommaso stopped 3 feet from her, close enough that she could smell the bergamot and the cigars. He needs to learn, the way he should have learned 3 years ago, when I gave him the chance to be loyal, that there is no walking away. There is only the family, and what the family allows. "He's already given everything to the FBI," Iris said. "And the DIA. You're not flying to Palermo, you're here, which means you know the trap closed, which means it's already over for you. And this," she gestured at the room, the guns, the bleeding men, "this is just a dying animal biting." Something flickered across Tommaso's face, and for one cold instant Iris thought she'd misjudged, thought she'd pushed too hard. Then he laughed, genuinely, warmly, an old man's delighted laugh. "Oh, my dear," he said, "you're half right, and the half you've got wrong is the half that's going to break your heart." He reached out, slowly, and Iris held absolutely still, and he did not touch her. He touched, with one gentle finger, the sleeping child's dark curls, Lucia's curls, and Iris had to use everything she had not to flinch the child away and trigger exactly the panic she'd warned him about. The trap did close, but not on me. You see, the American who was supposed to take my nephew's evidence and lock me away? He smiled the funeral smile. "He's mine. He's been mine for 9 years. So when my brilliant, patient nephew handed over his flash drive and his accounts and his decades of careful paper, he handed them to me. Everything he built to destroy me, I now hold. And Salvatore is, at this very moment, getting on a plane to Venice believing he's won, believing he's coming here to start his clean new life. He has no idea." Tommaso withdrew his hand from the child's hair, gently, and stepped back, and his voice was almost kind. "He's coming straight to me, Dr. Delacroix, to this house. And when he arrives, he's going to find his daughter and his doctor exactly where he left them. And he's going to find me sitting in this chair, and he's going to understand, finally, completely, that there was never any version of this where he won, that the blood always solves its own problems. And then the kindness dropped away entirely. Then I'm going to make him choose which of you dies first, the way I should have made him choose 3 years ago. And this time, my soft-stomached nephew is going to learn what loyalty costs. The room was silent. Marco strained against his ropes. The child slept on, fragile heart beating against Iris's chest. And Iris Delacroix, surgeon, who had spent her whole life finding the bleeders before they killed, looked at the old man and understood that she had perhaps 4 minutes before Sal's plane landed, and walked into this, and that the only person in this room who could change what happened next was her. So she did the thing she always did. She stopped feeling the fear. She started looking for the window. The window in surgery was the moment the body gave you, the half-second when the rhythm faltered in exactly the right way, when the bleeder showed its source, when the impossible became briefly possible. You did not create the window. You waited for it, and you recognized it, and you moved through it before it closed. Iris had 3 pieces of information and 4 minutes. The first piece. Tommaso wanted Sal to arrive and see. That was the whole point, the theatre, the lesson, which meant Tommaso would not kill her or Gia before Sal got here, because a dead audience learns nothing. They were safe, briefly, precisely because they were bait. The second piece. The man in the hall was bleeding, and 3 of the 4 gunmen kept glancing toward the corridor where he lay, because he was one of theirs, blood, and even monsters flinch at their own blood, dying. The third piece. Marco was alive, bound but alive, on the floor by the window, and Marco's eyes had stopped blazing with helpless fury and started doing something else, tracking, calculating, the look of a soldier waiting for his moment too. And there was a fourth thing, the thing Tommaso didn't know, the thing none of them knew, the thing that was, in the end, the whole window. Sal had not gotten on that plane believing he'd won. Because Iris knew Sal Mancini now. She knew how his mind worked. She knew that a man who had spent 3 years building a case in perfect patience, who had said the heart rewards patience, who had drilled her on the second boat and the key on the ledge. A man that careful did not hand his only copy of everything to a single FBI agent and fly off whistling. She would have bet her hands on it. Sal had backups. Sal had told the DIA things he hadn't told the Americans, separately, on purpose, because he trusted no one with all of it. If the American was dirty, the Italian side was not necessarily blown. Tommaso might hold the flash drive. He did not necessarily hold everything, which meant Tommaso's certainty, his lovely, fatal certainty that he had already won, was itself the bleeder. The overconfidence was the wound. She just had to make it bleed. "You're wrong about one thing," Iris said. She kept her voice conversational, almost bored, the way she'd talk a frightened resident down. "You think he handed everything to your man in the FBI? He didn't. Sal doesn't trust anyone with everything. He split it. The Americans got one half, the Italians got the other, separately, and they don't know about each other. He set it up that way on purpose, in case exactly this happened, in case someone inside was bored. She watched Tommaso's face, watched for the flicker. Your man gave you the American half. Good for you. But the DIA has the Sicilian half, the half about you, about Lucia, about Palermo, and they're not bought, Mr. Mancini. 20 years they've wanted you. So when your plane was supposed to land in Palermo and you weren't on it, they moved. They're not waiting for you to walk into a meeting. They went to your house this morning. They froze the accounts they do know about. The half you don't control is already gone. It was a guess, a surgeon's educated guess, built from everything she knew about the man she was falling for and everything she'd learned in 3 weeks about the man in front of her. She had no way to know if it was true, but she watched it land, and she saw the flicker. The smallest thing. A tightening at the corner of one eye, a half-second of recalculation, and she knew she'd hit something, knew there was enough doubt in him now to crack the certainty. And a man who suddenly isn't sure he's won is a man who stops being patient. You're guessing, Tommaso said, but his voice had changed, just slightly. Maybe, Iris said. Are you sure enough to bet your freedom on it? Because here's what I'd do, in your position, if I were a smart old man who'd survived 50 years by knowing when the table had turned. I'd take the win I actually have. I'd take the flash drive, the American half, and I'd disappear. Tonight, while you still can, before the Italian half catches up to you. I wouldn't waste my last clean hours staging a lesson for a nephew, because lessons are sentiment, Mr.
Mancini. And you told Sal yourself, sentiment is expensive. You'd be doing the exact thing you despise. You'd be letting your hatred of him cost you the only thing that matters, which is getting out alive. The way, she let it land soft and lethal, the way Sal once let his fear of you cost him the only thing that mattered to him. You're about to make his mistake. The smart play is to leave, right now. It was the most dangerous thing she had ever done. She was, with nothing but words, trying to talk a murderer out of murder, by appealing to the one thing he respected more than revenge, his own survival, his own intelligence, his 50 years of being the man who walked away clean, while everyone else got caught in sentiment. For a long, long moment, the room held its breath.
Tommaso looked at her, and she watched the calculation move behind the green-grey eyes, the cold animal weighing the table, and she thought, come on, you're a survivor first, and a monster second. Survive, choose the boat, leave us and run. And she almost had him. She saw it. She saw him begin to turn, begin to weigh the door against the chair, begin to choose the smart, cold thing over the satisfying, warm one. And that was the moment, of course, that the world chose to take the decision out of everyone's hands. Because that was the moment Salvatore Mancini's water taxi slid silently up to the private gate 2 floors below, and Sal, who had not in fact gotten on the plane believing he'd won, who had landed in Venice an hour early on a flight Tommaso didn't know about, who had been told by the Italian agent, the clean one, 20 minutes ago that the American side had gone dark and his daughter's safe house wasn't answering, came up through the water gate of his own palazzo with a gun in his hand and Marco's missing men's silence screaming in his ears, and he came up fast, and he came up the way he'd come into the warehouse, and the window Iris had been so carefully prying open slammed shut around the sound of the first shot. Afterward, Iris would remember it the way she remembered the worst surgeries, not as a continuous thing, but as a series of frozen frames lit by muzzle flash, each one entire. Frame 1. The crack of a shot from the stairwell. One of Tommaso's men by the door folding sideways, the room exploding into motion. Frame 2. Iris pivoting on instinct, her whole body curling around the child, turning her own back to the room, making herself a wall of flesh and bone between Gia and the guns. Exactly the way she'd shielded children from X-rays 1,000 times, the gesture older than thought. Frame 3. Marco, who had spent 10 minutes working the ropes against the rough edge of the stone hearth while everyone watched the doctor talk. Marco coming up off the floor with his hands free and a roar in his chest, throwing his whole vast body at the nearest gunman. Frame 4. Sal in the doorway. Not the philanthropist, not even the man from the warehouse. Something past that, something Iris had no name for. A father who had landed an hour early to find his men dead in the halls, who had climbed 2 flights of stairs, not knowing if his daughter was already gone, who came into that room having already, in the eternity of the climb, lived through her death 100 times. The look on his face was not rage. It was the absolute, terminal calm of a man with nothing left to lose, and it was the most frightening thing in a room full of guns. What followed lasted perhaps 40 seconds. Sal moved through Tommaso's men the way water moves through a broken dam, total, indifferent, unstoppable. 2 of them went down before they'd fully turned. Marco took a third to the ground in a tangle of fists. A bullet found Sal. Iris heard him grunt, saw him stagger, saw red bloom on his left shoulder, and saw it not slow him by even a half step, because a man who has already accepted his own death is not deterred by a wound. And Iris, curled around the child in the corner, did the only thing she could do, which was the thing she always did. She stayed calm, she protected her patient, and she waited for the window. It came in the form of Tommaso, because the old man, the survivor, the man who had almost taken Iris's advice and chosen the boat over the lesson, did the thing that survivors do when the table turns all the way over. He grabbed the nearest weapon, which was not a gun. It was the child. He lunged for Gia in Iris's arms with the old reptile instinct that a hostage is worth more than a bullet, and his hands closed on the blanket. And Iris Delacroix, pediatric cardiothoracic surgeon, who had the steadiest hands in the city of New Orleans, who had warned this man with perfect clinical accuracy that frightening the child could stop her fragile heart, did not let him have her. She turned, putting her body fully between Tommaso and the child, and with the heel of her free hand she drove a strike up into the old man's throat. Not a brawler's blow, a surgeon's blow, anatomically exact, into the soft notch above the sternum where the trachea was vulnerable. And Tommaso Mancini, 71 years old, choked and reeled back, his hands flying to his own throat, and in that half-second of him not holding a weapon, and not holding the child, and not being able to breathe, Sal crossed the room. What happened then, Iris did not entirely see, because she had already turned away, already dropped to her knees over Gia, already pressed her stethoscope-trained ear to the child's chest in the chaos to check the heart, the heart, the heart. And the heart was beating, frightened, fast but strong, the conduit holding, the rhythm clean. The child was screaming now, finally awake, terrified, alive, alive. And a screaming child was the best sound in the world, because a screaming child was a breathing child. When Iris looked up, it was over. Tommaso Mancini was on the floor by the cold fireplace, alive but finished, Sal's knee in his back and Sal's gun against the base of his skull, and the room was full of the sudden, specific quiet that comes after violence, the ringing, the smell of cordite and blood. Marco breathing hard over a groaning man, two of Tommaso's gunmen dead, and the rest down. And Sal, bleeding from the shoulder, his hands shaking now that there was nothing left to do with them, looked across the wreckage of his ancestral room at Iris on the floor, with his screaming daughter in her arms, and his whole terrible calm broke at once. "Is she—" His voice was a ruin. "Iris, her heart, is her—" "She's fine." Iris had to shout it over the child's crying, and she was crying herself now, finally, the wall down, the O-R voice gone. "Sal, she's fine. The heart held. She's just scared. She's fine." And under Sal's knee, his face pressed to the cold marble floor of the palazzo his family had owned for 400 years, Tommaso Mancini began, horribly, to laugh. "You can't," the old man wheezed. "You can't kill me, Salvatore. You couldn't do it 3 years ago in your kitchen, and you can't do it now. You don't have the stomach. It's not in you. It was never in you. You're not your father. You're not me. You're a soft man playing at—" Sal pressed the gun harder against his uncle's skull, and his finger was on the trigger, and Iris saw the whole history of 3 years of grief and guilt, and a woman at the bottom of the river gather in his face. And she knew that he could do it now, that the man who'd walked into the warehouse could absolutely do it, that no one in this room or this city would ever say a word. "Sal," Iris said. Just his name, across the room, over the screaming child and the laughing monster. He looked up at her. His eyes were wild and wet and lost. "Don't," she said, and her voice was steady again, the O-R voice, the voice that had talked a murderer toward a boat, the voice that found the right thing in the chaos. "Not because he doesn't deserve it, he does, but because you've already won the right way, the patient way, the way that takes everything from him and gives everything back to you. You kill him now, and you're his. You're the family. You're the blood solving its own problems, exactly like he said. Don't let him make you that, not in front of her." She tilted her head down at the child sobbing against her chest. "She's awake, Sal. She'll remember whatever you do next, so make it the thing you want her to remember. Make it the man you're trying to become." For a long, long moment, Salvatore Mancini knelt with a gun against his uncle's skull, and his daughter watching, and the woman he loved telling him again to choose the hard right thing over the satisfying wrong one. And then, slowly, he took the gun away. "No," Sal said, to Tommaso, to himself, to the ghost of Lucia, to all of it. "You don't get the river. You don't get to disappear clean, the way you made her disappear. You're going to a cell, Zio. You're going to spend whatever years you've got left in a small, grey room, and every single day of it you're going to know that the soft nephew won, that the boy you called weak took the whole family apart and walked away into the light with everything you tried to drown." He stood, hauling the old man up, and the cold facade slid back over his face. But it was different now, lighter somehow, 3 years lighter. Marco, call the DIA, the clean one. Tell them we have him, and we have the rest of them, and tell them— Sal looked at Iris, at his daughter, at the life he'd nearly lost twice. Tell them it's over. Tell them the family is finished. It was not, of course, over that night. Nothing real is ever over in a single night. What followed was weeks, months of the grinding, unglamorous machinery of justice, the part that never makes the films. Iris learned that this too was a kind of surgery, long, careful, exhausting, performed on a patient who fought you the whole way, with success measured not in a single dramatic moment, but in 1,000 small, correct decisions made under pressure. Sal had been right about himself, and Iris had been right about him too. He had not handed everything to one FBI agent. The flash drive Tommaso's man had intercepted was real, but it was a copy, and a partial one, salted with enough truth to be convincing, and missing the keystone, the Lucia evidence, the offshore architecture, the recordings. Those Sal had given, separately and in person, to the one DIA magistrate he'd spent 6 months vetting, a woman in Rome with 2 decades of dead colleagues behind her, and no price anyone had ever found. When the American side went dark, she had not. She had been the clean half of the trap, and the trap, in the end, had held. Not the way Sal designed it, but the way he'd built in redundancy against, because he was a man who'd learned the hard way that the only plans worth making were the ones that survived betrayal. Tommaso Mancini was arrested in Venice that night and extradited to Italy within the week. The evidence Sal turned over— 2 decades, 3 jurisdictions, 41 names— became the largest organized crime case either country had seen in a generation. The American operations collapsed in a wave of dawn raids. The judge Tommaso owned was indicted. The FBI agent who'd taken Mancini's money for 9 years was arrested at his daughter's soccer game, which Iris found grimly fitting. And the murder of Lucia Mancini, 8 years buried under a paid-off accident report, was reopened. Sal sat in a federal facility for 9 days during the immunity negotiations, the hardest 9 days, with Gia asking every morning where Papa was, and Iris lying for the first time in her life to a child, telling her Papa was finishing the very important work of making them safe. When Sal walked out, it was as a protected witness with a signed agreement. Full immunity for his testimony, witness protection of his own design, and, the thing he had wanted most, the thing he'd built the whole impossible gambit to win, legal, internationally recognized custody of his daughter, with every Mancini family claim to the child severed forever. He had given up everything. The port, the penthouse 41 floors above the river, the foundation, the mansion on St. Charles, the $80 million terminal, the empire his father had built and his uncle had stolen. He kept nothing but his daughter, his freedom, his life, and one quiet palazzo in Dorsoduro that no one had ever been able to connect to the Mancini name. "You're a poor man now," Iris told him, the night he came back to them in Venice, gaunt and grey from the 9 days, but free. Free, the word still strange on him. "I have never," Sal said, looking at her across the frescoed room where his daughter slept and the canal glittered through the tall windows, "been so rich in my life." There was, between them, one more reckoning, the one that had nothing to do with courts. It came on a grey afternoon a few weeks later, when the worst of the legal storm had passed and the strange new ordinary life had begun to take shape, and Iris found Sal standing at the window where she always stood, looking out at the water. "You haven't asked me," she said, "the thing you said you'd ask, when it was over." She came and stood beside him. "It's over, Sal. It's been over for weeks, and you've been careful, distant, keeping the line again." He was quiet for a moment. "Because I'm still working out," he said slowly, "whether I have any right to ask it. You know what I am, Iris. You knew before anyone. You stood on a walkway by the river the first day, and you said you knew who I was and what I was, and you were right, and nothing that's happened since has made it untrue. I killed men. I let the man who murdered my wife pass me the bread for 3 years. My hands," he looked at them, "the same hands that came for you in that warehouse. You felt my heart through your fingers that night, but you also felt what those hands had just done. I'm not a good man who did bad things. I'm a bad man trying, very late, to become something else. And I don't know if a woman like you, a woman who spends her life saving children, who has more good in one hand than I have in my whole body, I don't know if you should tie yourself to that, to me, to what I've been." Iris was quiet for a moment. Outside, a boat slid down the canal, and a bell tolled somewhere across the city, and the grey light lay soft on the water. "Can I tell you what I see?" she said. "When I look at you." He didn't answer. He couldn't. "I see a man who built a library while he was building a case to bury his own family. I see a man who spent 3 years being patient instead of being satisfied, because patience was the only way to win the right thing. I see a man who walked into a warehouse for a doctor he'd known 3 weeks, and who took a gun off his uncle's skull because a child was watching, even though every cell in his body wanted to pull the trigger." She turned to face him. "I'm not naive, Sal. I'm not in love with a fantasy of a reformed gangster. I know exactly who you were. I have no illusions. But I've spent my whole life with my hands inside broken things, finding the part that still works, the part worth saving, the part that wants to heal. And I have never once been wrong about a heart." She put her hand flat on his chest, over the heart she'd felt hammer against her fingers on a warehouse floor. "Yours wants to heal. It's been wanting to heal for 3 years. And I'd like to be there while it does. Not because you're fixed, because you're trying. And because, God help me, because I love you. You impossible, dangerous, broken man, and I'm a grown woman who assesses her own risks, and I've assessed this one. And the answer is yes. Whatever it is you've been afraid to ask, the answer is yes." For a long moment, Salvatore Mancini, who had commanded a port and an army and a city, who had never in his adult life had to wonder if he was welcome, simply looked at her, undone. And then he did the thing he'd promised on a tarmac in New Orleans. He took her face in his hands, gently, the gentle hands and not the other ones, and he kissed her, properly this time, slowly, with nothing chasing them, and no ocean to cross, and no clock running down. A kiss with the whole impossible weight of 2 ruined lives deciding, against all sense, to build one good one out of the wreckage. When they broke apart, his forehead resting against hers, he laughed, A real laugh, a young laugh, a laugh she'd never heard from him. "I had a whole speech," he murmured. "You'll get to use it eventually," Iris said. "We have time now. That's the whole point. We finally have time." Time, it turned out, was the strangest luxury of all and the hardest to learn to spend. For a man who had spent 20 years measuring his days in threats answered and territories held, the slow, gold mornings of Venice were almost unbearable at first.
Sal did not know how to wake up with nothing to defend. He'd surface before dawn out of old habit, reaching for a phone that no longer carried the weight of an empire, and lie there in the grey light, listening to the water lap at the foundations of the palazzo, and the small, ordinary sounds of a household that was, for the first time in his life, simply a household. A child's feet, a coffee pot, Iris humming, off-key and unself-conscious in the next room. He learned, slowly, the way he'd learned everything that mattered, patiently. Witness protection, in their case, was an unusual arrangement. The DIA and the US Marshals had wanted to relocate them to a sealed identity in some anonymous suburb. But Sal had negotiated something different, something that traded a measure of safety for a measure of life. They would keep the Venice Palazzo, which had never been connected to the Mancini name, under the Liechtenstein Trust and a new set of papers. The remaining threat was manageable. With Tommaso in a cell and the family's resources frozen and scattered, the men who might have wanted revenge had neither the money, nor the organisation, nor frankly the motive, since the thing they'd have been avenging was itself in prison. The DIA kept a quiet eye, Marco stayed, and the city of water, which had hidden refugees and exiles and the inconveniently alive for 1,000 years, hid them too, easily, the way it hid everything, in plain sight among the masks. Gia thrived. This was the thing that healed Sal faster than anything Iris said or did, watching his daughter become, with each passing month, a different child. The blue had gone from her lips for good. The breathlessness was a memory. She grew. She ran, actually ran, down the calle and over the bridges, with Iris calling after her to slow down, and Sal's heart in his throat every time, not from her heart anymore, but from a father's ordinary terror, the good kind, the kind he'd never been allowed before. She started school, a small international school near the Accademia, and came home with Italian on her tongue and friends whose fathers were architects and glass-blowers and gondoliers, and not one of whom had ever heard the name Mancini. She did not remember the night in the palazzo. Iris had watched for it carefully, the way she watched for any complication, nightmares, withdrawal, the marks that violence leaves on children. But Gia had been wrapped in a blanket and shielded by a surgeon's body and Iris's calm voice the whole time. And what she retained was vague and dreamlike. A scary night when Papa got hurt, and the bad great-uncle went away, and children, mercifully, are built to let such things sink. The scars on her ribs and her back, the old ones from a drunk cousin's hands, faded with growth into thin silver lines that no one would ever explain to her until she was much older and could understand. And Iris built the thing she'd dreamed of without ever quite admitting she dreamed of it. The Italian medical bureaucracy was its own kind of dragon, but her credentials were impeccable, and her reputation, once the cardiologist at the Ospedale Civile started telling people who had really done the miracolo on the little American girl, opened doors. She did not want to run a surgical service again.
She'd spent 20 years carrying other people's children in her hands, and she found, to her surprise, that she was ready to set down some of that weight. What she wanted was smaller and, in its way, harder. A clinic. She opened it on the ground floor of a building 2 bridges from the Palazzo, a small paediatric clinic in a working-class corner of Dorsoduro, where the families were Venetian, not tourist, and where good children's medicine was harder to come by than the postcards suggested. She painted the walls the warm ochre of her grandmother's house in Treme, 4,000 miles away. She put a fish tank in the waiting room and the basket of stuffed rabbits and a sign on the door in Italian and English. She learned enough Veneziano to make the nonne laugh. She set bones and soothed fevers and caught twice in the first year congenital heart murmurs that a less expert ear would have missed, and sent those children on to the surgeons with notes so precise the surgeons asked who'd written them. She was, she realized one ordinary Tuesday, watching a 4-year-old chase a balloon around her waiting room, happier than she had ever been in her life. Sal came to the clinic some afternoons, when school let out, bringing Gia to do her homework at the little desk in the back office. He'd grown into the new life the way he grew into anything, completely, once he committed. He cooked now, properly, for the household, the grandmother's recipe cooking he'd never had time for. He'd taken up, of all things, the restoration of the palazzo, learning from old Venetian craftsmen how to repair the centuries-old plaster and the warped shutters, working with his hands at something that built instead of broke. He read. He'd become, improbably, a fixture at a particular cafe on a particular campo, where the old men who played cards there had no idea they were dealing in their daily 4-card game with a man who had once controlled the port of New Orleans. He testified, twice, by video link, in the trials that ground on across the ocean. Those days were hard. He'd come home grey and silent, and Iris learned not to fill the silence, only to be in it with him, the way she'd learned to sit in the quiet of an ICU. The Lucia trial was the hardest. He had to speak, on the record, the words he'd carried for 3 years. I knew, and I did nothing, and she died. But the magistrate in Rome, the clean one, the one who'd held the trap, had told him something he repeated to Iris that night, holding her in the dark, with the canal sounds rising through the windows. She said, "The bravest thing isn't the man who never falls," Sal murmured. "It's the man who finally stands up, even years too late, even carrying everything he did wrong, and tells the truth out loud, so it can't be buried again." She said Lucia got her justice because I finally became 8 years late, the man Lucia died believing I could be. His voice was thick. I don't know if that's true, but Gia gets to grow up knowing her mother was murdered for being brave, not killed in an accident for being careless. That's something. That's the one thing I could still give her. It's everything, Iris said into the dark. It's the whole thing, Sal. The truth is the whole thing. And she held him until the grey light came up over the water, the way it did every morning, indifferent and beautiful and entirely theirs. They married in the spring, 2 years after a woman stood on a rusted walkway by the Mississippi and told a dangerous man she knew exactly what he was. It was a small thing, by the standards of either of their old lives. No gala, no mansion, no chandeliers, no men with guns under their jackets. They married in the little campo outside Iris's clinic on a morning when the light came off the canal and turned the old stone gold, with Marco standing as Sal's witness and weeping openly the entire time. And Gia, 9 years old now, tall, brown-curled, fierce, her heart beating its clean, strong song under a yellow dress she'd chosen herself, holding the rings on a cushion and taking the responsibility with the gravity of a small judge. The card-playing old men from the cafe came. Iris's clinic families came, the non who'd taught her Veneziano and the children whose murmurs she'd caught. A handful of Iris's cousins flew over from New Orleans, suspicious and curious, and ultimately disarmed by the sheer happiness of it, by the way the cold, dangerous man their cousin had warned them about looked at her like she'd hung the moon. Marco was right, Iris thought, watching Gia's old phrase prove itself true. There was no priest from any family. There was a kind Venetian official, and after a long table set up in the campo, and food Sal had cooked himself for 2 days, and wine and music, and the whole working-class corner of Dorsoduro that had quietly adopted them, turning out to eat and dance under the strung lights as the evening came down soft and blue over the water. Sal stood at the edge of it at one point, watching his wife laugh with her cousins, watching his daughter dance with Marco's enormous, careful hands holding hers, watching the life he had built out of the wreckage of the one he'd burned. And Iris came and stood beside him, the way she had at a gala in another life, in another country, a lifetime ago. "You're doing the thing," she said, "the watching from the edge thing." Old habit, watching the room, counting the exits. And how many exits? He was quiet a moment, and then he laughed, soft, and put his arm around her and pulled her in against his side. "I stopped counting," he said, "about a year ago. I noticed last week that I'd stopped. I don't watch the exits anymore. I just watch." Iris leaned her head against his shoulder, the shoulder with the small white scar from a bullet in this very palazzo, and looked out at the campo full of light. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. She'd never asked before. It seemed on this day safe to ask. The other life, the power, the port, the penthouse, being the thing you were. Do you miss it? Sal considered it honestly, because she had taught him, more than anything else, to consider things honestly. "I miss feeling like I could solve anything," he admitted. "That's the seduction of it, you know, the real one, not the money. The feeling that there was no problem in the world you couldn't make disappear, pay it, threaten it, drown it. It's a kind of madness, but God, it's a comfortable madness." He turned and looked down at her. "And then Gia got sick. And for the first time there was a problem I couldn't pay or threaten or drown. And the only thing that could solve it was a woman who refused all three. Who looked at the most powerful man in the city and said, 'No, you can't buy me,' and 'Yes, I'll save your daughter,' and 'No, I'll never confuse the two.'" His arm tightened around her. "That was the day the madness started to break. The day I met something stronger than power. So no, amore, I don't miss it. The old life could make anything disappear, but it couldn't make anything stay. And staying," he looked out at his daughter dancing, at the lights, at the water. "Staying turns out to be the only thing I ever actually wanted." The party went late. Gia fell asleep in a chair against the warm stone with Cornelio, threadbare now, much loved, irreplaceable, tucked under her chin, and Marco carried her home over the bridges with the tenderness of the godfather a murdered woman had chosen well. The lights came down one by one. The old men shuffled off with their wine. The cousins were poured into a water taxi back to their hotel, promising to visit, meaning it. And in the morning, the first morning of the new life that was somehow also just the continuation of the life they'd already been living, which is the secret of marriage no one tells you. Iris Delacroix woke the way she now woke every morning, in the high bed in the frescoed room of a palazzo that had no name on any deed she could be traced through, with the grey-gold light coming up off the canal and the sound of the water lapping at the ancient stone. She got up before Sal, as she always did, an old habit from a life of dawn surgeries, and she went to the tall window and opened the shutters he'd restored with his own hands. And she looked out at Venice waking on the water. A boat heavy with vegetables for the market, a nonna leaning out of a window across the canal to shake out a cloth, a child somewhere already laughing, the bells beginning their slow conversation across the rooftops. Behind her, the man she had married slept, the man who had controlled a port and an army, who had killed and lied and let a coward's silence bury his first wife, who had then spent 3 patient years and everything he owned dismantling the empire that made him, who had taken a gun off his uncle's skull because she asked him to, because a child was watching, because he was trying. The man whose heart she had felt hammer against her fingers on a warehouse floor, and which now beat slow and easy in the early light, healed or healing, the way hearts do when they finally stop having to fight alone. She knew exactly who he had been. She had known from the first day, on a rusted walkway by a different river, in a different life. She had no illusions. She had never had illusions. That was the whole point. The love that survives is not the love that doesn't know. It's the love that knows everything, the blood and the salt of it, and stays anyway, and chooses every morning the person the other one is trying to become. She heard him stir behind her, felt him cross the room, felt his arms come around her at the window, his chin against her hair, both of them looking out at the water and the waking city and the impossible, ordinary, hard-won piece of it. "What are you thinking?" he murmured. Iris Delacroix smiled and leaned back into the man she loved and watched the morning come up gold over the canal. "That the heart rewards patience," she said. "I'm thinking it took us a long time and a lot of blood to get here. And I'm thinking I'd do every minute of it again." She turned in his arms to face him. "Good morning, Sal." "Good morning, amore mio," said the man who had stopped counting the exits and kissed his wife in the gold light, while below them, patient and eternal and entirely theirs, the water carried the whole bright morning toward the sea.